Papers, Conrad. What are you doing here? What time did you leave work? Is this your usual way home? And so on and so forth. Not that there was any rule against walking home by an unusual route, but it was enough to draw attention to you if the thought police heard about it. Suddenly the whole street was in commotion. There were yells of warning from all sides. People were shooting into the doorways like rabbits. A young woman leapt out of a doorway a little ahead of Winston, grabbed up a tiny child playing in a puddle, whipped her apron about it, and leapt back again, all in one movement. At the same instant, a man in a concertina-like black suit who had emerged from a side alley ran toward Winston, pointing excitedly to the sky. "Steamer!" he yelled. "Look out, Governor! Bang overhead! Lay down, quick!" Steamer was a nickname which for some reason the proles applied to rocket bombs. Winston promptly flung himself on his face. The proles were nearly always right when they gave you a warning of this kind. They seemed to possess some kind of instinct which told them several seconds in advance when a rocket was coming, although the rocket supposedly traveled faster than sound. Winston clasped his forearms about his head. There was a roar that seemed to make the pavement heave. A shower of light objects pattered onto his back. When he stood up, he found that he was covered with fragments of glass from the nearest window. He walked on. The bomb had demolished a group of houses 200 meters up the street. A black plume of smoke hung in the sky, and below it a cloud of plaster dust, in which a crowd was already forming around the ruins. There was a little pile of plaster lying on the pavement ahead of him, and in the middle of it he could see a bright red streak. When he got up to it, he saw that it was a human hand, severed at the wrist. Apart from the bloody stump, the hand was so completely whitened as to resemble a plaster cast. He kicked the thing into the gutter, and then, to avoid the crowd, turned down a side street to the right. Within 3 or 4 minutes, he was out of the area which the bomb had affected, and the sordid, swarming life of the streets was going on as though nothing had happened. It was nearly 20 hours, and the drinking shops, which the proles frequented, pubs they called them, were choked with customers. From their grimy swing doors, endlessly opening and shutting, there came forth a smell of urine, sawdust, and sour beer. In an angle formed by a projecting house front, 3 men were standing very close together, the middle one of them holding a folded-up newspaper, which the other 2 were studying over his shoulders. Even before he was near enough to make out the expression on their faces, Winston could see absorption in every line of their bodies. It was obviously some serious piece of news that they were reading. He was a few paces away from them when suddenly the group broke up, and 2 of the men were in a violent altercation. For a moment they seemed almost on the point of blows. "Can't you bleeding well listen to what I say? I tell you, no number ending in 781 for over 14 months. "Yes, it has, then." "No, it has not. Back home, I got the whole lot of them for over 2 years, wrote down on a piece of paper. I takes them down, regular as the clock, and I tell you, no number ending in 7. Yes, a 7 has one. I could pretty near tell you the bleeding number, 407 it ended in. We were in February, 2nd week in February. February, your grandmother. I got it all down in black and white, and I tell you, no number. Oh, pack it in," said the 3rd man. They were talking about the lottery. Winston looked back when he had gone 30 meters. They were still arguing with vivid, passionate faces. The lottery, with its weekly payout of enormous prizes, was the one public event to which the proles paid serious attention. It was probable that there were some millions of proles for whom the lottery was the principal, if not the only reason for remaining alive. It was their delight, their folly, their anodyne, their intellectual stimulant. Where the lottery was concerned, even people who could barely read and write seemed capable of intricate calculations and staggering feats of memory. There was a whole tribe of men who made a living simply by selling systems, forecasts, and lucky amulets. Winston had nothing to do with the running of the lottery, which was managed by the Ministry of Plenty, but he was aware, indeed everyone in the party was aware, that the prizes were largely imaginary. Only small sums were actually paid out, the winners of the big prizes being non-existent persons. In the absence of any real intercommunication between one part of Oceania and another, this was not difficult to arrange. But if there was hope, it lay in the proles. You had to cling on to it. When you put it in words, it sounded reasonable. It was when you looked at the human beings passing you on the pavement that it became an act of faith. The street into which he had turned ran downhill. He had a feeling that he had been in this neighborhood before, and that there was a main thoroughfare not far away. From somewhere ahead came a din of shouting voices. The street took a sharp turn and then ended in a flight of steps which led down into a sunken alley where a few stall-keepers were selling tired-looking vegetables. At this moment, Winston remembered where he was. The alley led out into the main street, and down the next turning, not 5 minutes away, was the junk shop where he had bought the blank book which was now his diary. And in a small stationer's shop not far away, he had bought his pen holder and his bottle of ink. He paused for a moment at the top of the steps. On the opposite side of the alley, there was a dingy little pub, whose windows appeared to be frosted over, but in reality were merely coated with dust. A very old man, bent but active, with white mustaches that bristled forward like those of a prawn, pushed open the swing door and went in. As Winston stood watching, it occurred to him that the old man, who must be 80 at the least, had already been middle-aged when the revolution happened. He and a few others like him were the last links that now existed with the vanished world of capitalism. In the party itself, there were not many people left whose ideas had been formed before the revolution. The older generation had mostly been wiped out in the great purges of the 50s and 60s, and the few who survived had long ago been terrified into complete intellectual surrender. If there was anyone alive who could give you a truthful account of conditions in the early part of the century, it could only be a prole. Suddenly, the passage from the history book that he had copied into his diary came back into Winston's mind, and a lunatic impulse took hold of him. He would go into the pub. He would scrape acquaintance with that old man and question him. He would say to him, "Tell me about your life when you were a boy. What was it like in those days? Were things better than they are now, or were they worse?" Hurriedly, lest he should have time to become frightened, he descended the steps and crossed the narrow street. It was madness, of course. As usual, there was no definite rule against talking to proles and frequenting their pubs. It was far too unusual an action to pass unnoticed. If the patrols appeared, he might plead an attack of faintness, but it was not likely that they would believe him. He pushed open the door, and a hideous, cheesy smell of sour beer hit him in the face. As he entered, the din of voices dropped to about half its volume. Behind his back, he could feel everyone eyeing his blue overalls. A game of darts, which was going on at the other end of the room, interrupted itself for perhaps as much as 30 seconds. The old man whom he had followed was standing at the bar, having some kind of altercation with the barman, a large, stout, hook-nosed young man with enormous forearms. A knot of others standing round with glasses in their hands were watching the scene. "I asked you civil enough, didn't I?" said the old man, straightening his shoulders pugnaciously. "You telling me you ain't got a pint mug in the old bleeding boozer?" "And what in hell's name is a pint?" said the barman, leaning forward with the tips of his fingers on the counter. "Look at him! Calls himself a barman and don't know what a pint is. Why, a pint's the half of a quart, and there's 4 quarts to the gallon. Have to teach you the ABC next." "Never heard of him," said the barman shortly. "Liter and half-liter, that's all we serve. There's the glasses on the shelf in front of you." "I'd like a pint," persisted the old man. "You could have drawn me off a pint easy enough. We didn't have these bleeding liters when I was a young man." "When you were a young man, we were all living in the treetops," said the barman with a glance at the other customers. There was a shout of laughter, and the uneasiness caused by Winston's entry seemed to disappear. The old man's white, stubbled face had flushed pink. He was turned away, muttering to himself, and bumped into Winston. Winston caught him gently by the arm. "May I offer you a drink?" he said. "You're a gent," said the other, straightening his shoulders again. He appeared not to have noticed Winston's blue overalls. "Pint," he added aggressively to the barman. "Pint or wallop." The barman swished 2 half-liters of dark brown beer into thick glasses, which he had rinsed in a bucket under the counter. Beer was the only drink you could get in prole pubs. The proles were not supposed to drink gin, though in practice they could get hold of it easily enough. The game of darts was in full swing again, and the knot of men at the bar had begun talking about lottery tickets. Winston's presence was forgotten for a moment. There was a deal table under the window where he and the old man could talk without fear of being overheard. It was horribly dangerous, but at any rate there was no telescreen in the room, a point he had made sure of as soon as he came in. "He could have drawed me off a pint," grumbled the old man as he settled down behind his glass. "A half-liter ain't enough. It don't satisfy, and a whole liter's too much. It starts my bladder running, let alone the price." "You must have seen great changes since you were a young man," said Winston tentatively. The old man's pale blue eyes moved from the darts board to the bar, and from the bar to the door of the gents, as though it were in the bar room that he expected the changes to have occurred. "When beer was better," he said finally, "and cheaper. When I was a young man, mild beer, wallop, we used to call it, was 4 pence a pint. It would Before the war, of course. Which war was that? Said Winston. It's all wars, said the old man vaguely. He took up his glass and his shoulders straightened again. Here's wishing you the very best of health. In his lean throat, the sharp-pointed Adam's apple made a surprisingly rapid up-and-down movement, and the beer vanished. Winston went to the bar and came back with 2 more half-liters. The old man appeared to have forgotten his prejudice against drinking a full liter. You are very much older than I am, said Winston. You must have been a grown man before I was born. You can remember what it was like in the old days, before the Revolution. People of my age don't really know anything about those times. We can only read about them in books, and what it says in the books may not be true. I should like your opinion on that. The history books say that life before the Revolution was completely different from what it is now. There was the most terrible oppression, injustice, poverty, worse than anything we can imagine. Here in London, the great mass of the people never had enough to eat from birth to death. Half of them hadn't even boots on their feet. They worked 12 hours a day. They left school at 9. They slept 10 in a room. And at the same time, there were only a very few people, only a few thousands, the capitalists they were called, who were rich and powerful. They owned everything that there was to own. They lived in great, gorgeous houses with 30 servants. They rode about in motor cars and 4-horse carriages. They drank champagne. They wore top hats. The old man brightened suddenly. Top hats, he said. Funny you should mention them. The same thing come into my head only yesterday. I don't know why. I was just thinking I ain't seen a top hat in years. Gone right out, they have. The last time I wore one was at my sister-in-law's funeral. And that was, well, I couldn't give you the date, but it must have been 50 years ago. Of course, it was only hired for the occasion, you understand. It isn't very important about the top hats, said Winston patiently. The point is, these capitalists, they and a few lawyers and priests and so forth who lived on them, were the lords of the earth. Everything existed for their benefit. You, the ordinary people, the workers, were their slaves. They could do what they liked with you. They could ship you off to Canada like cattle. They could sleep with your daughters if they chose. They could order you to be flogged with something called a cat-o'-nine-tails. You had to take your cap off when you passed them. Every capitalist went about with a gang of lackeys who, the old man brightened again. Lackeys, he said. Now there's a word I ain't heard ever since so long. Lackeys. That regular takes me back, that does. I recollect, donkeys years ago. I used to sometimes go to Hyde Park of a Sunday afternoon to hear the blokes making speeches. Salvation Army, Roman Catholics, Jews, Indians, all sorts there was. And there was one bloke. Well, I couldn't give you his name, but a real powerful speaker he was. He didn't have to give it to him. Lackeys, he says, lackeys of the bourgeoisie, flunkies of the ruling class, parasites, that was another of them, and hyenas, he definitely called them hyenas. Of course, he was referring to the Labour Party, you understand. Winston had the feeling that they were talking at cross purposes. What I really wanted to know was this, he said. Do you feel that you have more freedom now than you had in those days? Are you treated more like a human being? In the old days, the rich people, the people at the top, the House of Lords, put in the old man reminiscently. The House of Lords, if you like. What I'm asking is, were these people able to treat you as an inferior simply because they were rich and you were poor? Is it a fact, for instance, that you had to call them sir and take off your cap when you passed them? The old man appeared to think deeply. He drank off about a quarter of his beer before answering. Yes, he said. They liked you to touch your cap to them and show respect like. I didn't agree with it myself, but I'd done it often enough. Had to, as you might say. And was it usual, I'm only quoting what I've read in history books, was it usual for these people and their servants to push you off the pavement into the gutter? One of them pushed me once, said the old man. I recollect it as if it were yesterday. It was boat race night. Terrible rowdy they used to get on boat race night. And I bumps into a young bloke on Shaftesbury Avenue. Quite the gent he was. Dress shirt, top hat, black overcoat. He was kind of zigzagging across the pavement, and I bumps into him accidental-like. He says, why can't you look where you're going, he says. I says, do you think you bopped the bleeding pavement? He says, I twist your bloody head off if you get fresh with me. I says, you're drunk. I'll give you in charge in half a minute, I says. And if you'll believe me, he puts his hand on my chest and gives me a shove as pretty near sent me under the wheels of a bus. Well, I was young in them days, and I was going to have fetched him one. Only a sense of helplessness took hold of Winston. The old man's memory was nothing but a rubbish heap of details. One could question him all day without getting any real information. The party histories might still be true after a fashion. They might even be completely true. He made a last attempt. "Perhaps I have not made myself clear," he said. "What I'm trying to say is this. You have been alive a very long time. You lived half your life before the revolution. In 1925, for instance, you were already grown up. Would you say, from what you can remember, that life in 1925 was better than it is now, or worse? If you could choose, would you prefer to live then or now?" The old man looked meditatively at the darts board. He finished up his beer more slowly than before. When he spoke, it was with a tolerant, philosophic air, as though the beer had mellowed. "I know what you'd expect me to say," he said. "You expect me to say as I'd sooner be young again. Most people would say they'd sooner be young if you asked them. You got your health and strength when you're young. When you get to my time of life, you ain't never well. I suffer something wicked from my feet, and my bladder's just terrible. 6 and 7 times a night it has me out of bed. On the other hand, there's great advantages in being an old man. You ain't got the same worries. No truck with women, and that's a great thing. I ain't had a woman for near on 30 years, if you'd credit me, nor wanted to much more." Winston sat back against the windowsill. There was no use going on. He was about to buy some more beer when the old man suddenly got up and shuffled rapidly into the stinking urinal at the side of the room. The extra half-liter was already working on him. Winston sat for a minute or two gazing at his empty glass, and hardly noticed when his feet carried him out into the street again. Within 20 years at the most, he reflected, the huge and simple question, was life better before the revolution than it is now, would have ceased once and for all to be answered. But in effect it was unanswerable even now, since the few scattered survivors from the ancient world were incapable of comparing one age with another. They remembered a million useless things, a quarrel with a workmate, a hunt for a lost bicycle pump, the expression on a long-dead sister's face, the swirls of dust on a windy morning 70 years ago. But all the relevant facts were outside the range of their vision. They were like the ants, which can see small objects but not large ones. And when memory failed and written records were falsified, when that happened, the claim of the party to have improved the conditions of human life had got to be accepted, because there did not exist, and never again could exist, any standard against which it could be tested. At this moment his train of thought stopped abruptly. He halted and looked up. He was in a narrow street with a few dark little shops interspersed among dwelling houses. Immediately above his head there hung 3 discolored metal balls, which looked as if they had once been gilded. He seemed to know the place. Of course, he was standing outside the junk shop where he bought the diary. A twinge of fear went through him. It had been a sufficiently rash act to buy the book in the beginning, and he had sworn never to come near the place again. And yet the instant that he allowed his thoughts to wander, his feet had brought him back here of their own accord. It was precisely against suicidal impulses of this kind that he had hoped to guard himself by opening the diary. At the same time, he noticed that although it was nearly 21 hours, the shop was still open. With the feeling that he would be less conspicuous inside than hanging about on the pavement, he stepped through the doorway. If questioned, he could possibly say that he was trying to buy razor blades.
This ends side 2 of cassette 2. Please stop the tape before fast-forwarding to the end and loading cassette 3.
The proprietor had just lighted a hanging oil lamp which gave off an unclean but friendly smell. He was a man of perhaps 60, frail and bowed, with a long, benevolent nose and mild eyes distorted by thick spectacles. His hair was almost white, but his eyebrows were bushy and still black. His spectacles, his gentle, fussy movements, and the fact that he was wearing an aged jacket of black velvet gave him a vague air of intellectuality, as though he had been some kind of literary man, perhaps a musician. His voice was soft, his then faded, and his accent less debased than that of a majority of Puritans. "I recognized you on the pavement," he said immediately. You're the gentleman that bought the young lady's keepsake album. That was a beautiful bit of paper, that was. Cream laid, it used to be called. There's been no paper like that made for, oh, I dare say 50 years. He peered at Winston over the top of his spectacles. Is there anything special I can do for you, or did you just want to look around? I was passing, said Winston vaguely. I just looked in. I don't want anything in particular. It's just as well, said the other, because I don't suppose I could have satisfied you. He made an apologetic gesture with his soft palmed hand. You see how it is. An empty shop, you might say. Between you and me, the antique trade's just about finished. No demand any longer, and no stock. Furniture, china, glass, it's all been broken up by degrees. And of course the metal stuff's mostly been melted down. I haven't seen a brass candlestick in years. The tiny interior of the shop was in fact uncomfortably full, but there was almost nothing in it of the slightest value. The floor space was very restricted, because all round the walls were stacked innumerable dusty picture frames. In the window there were trays of nuts and bolts, worn-out chisels, penknives with broken blades, tarnished watches that did not even pretend to be in going order, and other miscellaneous rubbish. Only on a small table in the corner was there a litter of odds and ends, lacquered snuff boxes, agate brooches, and all, which looked as though they might include something interesting. As Winston wandered toward the table, his eye was caught by a round, smooth thing that gleamed softly in the lamplight, and he picked it up. It was a heavy lump of glass, curved on one side, flat on the other, making almost a hemisphere. There was a peculiar softness, as of rainwater, in both the color and the texture of the glass. At the heart of it, magnified by the curved surface, there was a strange, pink, convoluted object that recalled a rose or a sea anemone. What is it? Said Winston, fascinated. That's coral, that is, said the old man. It must have come from the Indian Ocean. They used to kind of embed it in the glass. That wasn't made less than 100 years ago. More, look. It's a beautiful thing, said Winston. It is a beautiful thing, said the other appreciatively, but there's not many that'd say so nowadays. He coughed. Now, if it so happened that you wanted to buy it, that'd cost you $4. I can remember when a thing like that would have fetched £8, and £8 was, well, I can't work it out, but it was a lot of money. But who cares about genuine antiques nowadays, even the few that's left? Winston immediately paid over the $4 and slid the coveted thing into his pocket. What appealed to him about it was not so much its beauty, as the air it seemed to possess of belonging to an age quite different from the present. The soft, rain-watery glass was not like any glass that he had ever seen. The thing was doubly attractive because of its apparent uselessness, though he could guess that it must once have been intended as a paper. It was very heavy in his pocket, but fortunately it did not make much of a fall. It was a queer thing, even a compromising thing, for a party member to have in his possession. Anything old, and for that matter anything beautiful, was always vaguely suspect. The old man had grown noticeably more cheerful after receiving the $4. Winston realized that he would have accepted 3 or even 2. There's another room upstairs that you might care to take a look at, he said. There's not much in it, just a few pieces. We'll do with a light. Upstairs. He lit another lamp and with bowed back led the way slowly up the steep and ruined stairs and along a tiny passage into a room which did not give on the street, but looked out on a cobbled yard and a forest of chimneys. Winston noticed that the furniture was still arranged as though the room were meant to be lived in. There was a strip of carpet on the floor, a picture or two on the walls, and a deep, slatternly armchair drawn up to the fireplace. An old-fashioned glass clock with a 12-hour face was ticking away on the mantelpiece. Under the window and occupying nearly a quarter of the room was an enormous bed with a mattress still on it. We lived here till my wife died, said the old man, half apologetically. I'm selling the furniture off by little and little. Now, that's a beautiful mahogany bed, or at least it would be if you could get the bugs out of it, but I dare say you'd find it a little bit cumbersome. He was holding the lamp high up so as to illumine the whole room, and in the warm, dim light the place looked curiously inviting. The thought flitted through Winston's mind that it would probably be quite easy to rent the room for a few dollars a week, if he dared to take the risk. It was a wild, impossible notion, to be abandoned as soon as thought of. But the room had awakened in him a sort of nostalgia, a sort of ancestral memory. It seemed to him that he knew exactly what it felt like to sit in a room like this, in an armchair beside an open fire with your feet in the fender and a kettle on the hob, utterly alone, utterly secure, with nobody watching you, no voice pursuing you, no sound except the singing of the kettle and the friendly ticking of the clock. There's no telescreen, he could not help murmuring. Ah, said the old man, I never had one of those things. Too expensive. And I never seemed to feel the need of it somehow. Now, that's a nice gate-leg table in the corner there, though of course you'd have to put new hinges on it if you wanted to use the flaps. There was a small bookcase in the other corner, and Winston had already gravitated toward it. It contained nothing but rubbish. The hunting down and destruction of books had been done with the same thoroughness in the prole quarters as everywhere else. It was very unlikely that there existed anywhere in Oceania a copy of a book printed earlier than 1960. The old man, still carrying the lamp, was standing in front of a picture in a rosewood frame, which hung on the other side of the fireplace on top of the bed. Now, if you happen to be interested in old prints at all, he began delicately. Winston came across to examine the picture. It was a steel engraving of an oval building with rectangular windows and a small tower in front. There was a railing running round the building, and at the rear end there was what appeared to be a statue. Winston gazed at it for some moments. It seemed vaguely familiar, though he did not remember the statue. The frame was fixed to the wall, said the old man, but I could unscrew it from the room, I can't say. I know that building, said Winston finally. It's a ruin now. It's in the middle of the street outside the Palace of Justice. That's right, outside the law courts. It was bombed in, many years ago. It was a church at one time. St. Clement's Dane, its name was. He smiled apologetically, as though conscious of saying something slightly ridiculous, and added, Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. What's that? Oh, oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. That was a rhyme we had when I was a little boy. How it goes on, I don't remember. But I do know it ended up, here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head. It was a kind of dance. They held out their arms for you to pass under, and when they came to here comes a chopper to chop off your head, they brought their arms down and caught you. It was just names of churches. All the London churches were in it, all the principal ones. Winston wondered vaguely to what century the church belonged. It was always difficult to determine the age of a London building. Anything large and impressive, if it was reasonably new in appearance, was automatically claimed as having been built since the Revolution, while anything that was obviously of earlier date was ascribed to some dim period called the Middle Ages. The centuries of capitalism were held to have produced nothing of any value. One could not learn history from architecture any more than one could learn it from books. Statues, inscriptions, memorial stones, the names of streets, anything that might throw light upon the past had been systematically ignored. I never knew it had been a church, he said. There's a lot of them left, maybe, said the old man, although they've been put to other uses. Now, how did that rhyme go? I've got it. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. There, now that's as far as I can get. A farthing, that was a small copper coin, looked something like a cent. Where was St. Martin's? Said Winston. St. Martin's? Well, that's still standing. It's in Victory Square, alongside the picture gallery. A building with a kind of triangular porch and pillars in front and a big flight of steps. Winston knew the place well. It was a museum used for propaganda displays of various kinds, scale models of rocket bombs and floating fortresses, waxwork tableaus illustrating enemy atrocities and the like. St. Martin's in the Fields, it used to be called, supplemented the old man. Though I don't recollect any fields anywhere in those parts. Winston did not buy the picture. It would have been an even more incongruous possession than the glass paperweight and impossible to carry home unless it were taken out of its frame. But he lingered for some minutes more, talking to the man whose name he discovered was not Weeks, as one might have gathered from the inscription on the shop front, but Charrington. Mr. Charrington, it seemed, was a widower, aged 63, and had inhabited this shop for 30 years. Throughout that time, he had been intending to alter the name over the window, but had never quite got to the point of doing it. All the while that they were talking, the half-remembered line kept running through Winston's head. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. It was curious, but when you said it to yourself, you had the illusion of actually hearing bells. The bells of a lost London that still existed somewhere or other, disguised and forgotten. From one ghostly steeple after another, he seemed to hear them pealing forth. Yet so far as he could remember, he had never in real life heard church bells ring. He got away from Mr. Charrington and went down the stairs alone, so as not to let the old man see him reconnoitering the street before stepping out of the door. He had already made up his mind that after a suitable interval, a month say, he would take the risk of visiting the shop again. It was perhaps not more dangerous than shirking an evening at the centre. The serious piece of folly had been to come back here in the first place, after buying the diary, and without knowing whether the proprietor of the shop could be trusted. However, yes, he thought again, he would come back. He would buy further scraps of beautiful rubbish. He would buy the engraving of St. Clement's Dane, take it out of its frame and carry it home concealed under the jacket of his overalls. He would drag the rest of that poem out of Mr. Charrington's memory. Even the lunatic project of renting the room upstairs flashed momentarily through his mind again. For perhaps 5 seconds, exaltation made him careless, and he stepped out onto the pavement without so much as a preliminary glance through the window. He had even started humming to an improvised tune. Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's. You owe me 3 farthings, say that. Suddenly his heart seemed to turn to ice and his bowels to water. A figure in blue overalls was coming down the pavement, not 10 meters away. It was the girl from the fiction department, the girl with dark hair. The light was failing, but there was no difficulty in recognizing her. She looked him straight in the face, and walked quickly on as though she had not seen him. For a few seconds, Winston was too paralyzed to move. Then he turned to the right and walked heavily away, not noticing for the moment that he was going in the wrong direction. At any rate, one question was settled. There was no doubting any longer that the girl was spying on him. She must have followed him here, because it was not credible that by pure chance she should have happened to be walking on the same evening up the same obscure back street, kilometers distant from any quarter where party members lived. It was too great a coincidence. Whether she was really an agent of the thought police or simply an amateur spy actuated by officiousness hardly mattered. It was enough that she was watching him. Probably she had seen him go into the pub as well. It was an effort to walk. The lump of glass in his pocket banged against his thigh at each step, and he was half-minded to take it out and throw it away. The worst thing was the pain in his belly. For a couple of minutes he had the feeling that he would die if he did not reach a lavatory soon. But there would be no public lavatories in a quarter like this. And the spasm passed, leaving a dull ache. The street was a blind alley. Winston halted, stood for several seconds, wondering vaguely what to do, then turned round and began to retrace his steps. As he turned, it occurred to him that the girl had only passed him 3 minutes ago, and that by running he could probably catch up with her. He could keep on her track till they were in some quiet place, and then smash her skull in with a cobblestone. A piece of glass in his pocket would be heavy enough for the job. But he abandoned the idea immediately, because even the thought of making any physical effort was unbearable. He could not run, he could not strike a blow. Besides, she was young and lusty and would defend herself. He thought also of hurrying to the community center and staying there till the place closed so as to establish a partial alibi for the evening. But that too was impossible. A deadly lassitude had taken hold of him. All he wanted was to get home quickly and then sit down and be quiet. It was after 22 hours when he got back to the flat. The lights would be switched off at the main at 23:30. He went into the kitchen and swallowed nearly a teacupful of Victory gin. Then he went to the table in the alcove, sat down, and took a diary out of the drawer. But he did not open it at once. From the telescreen, a brassy female voice was squalling a patriotic song. He sat staring at the marbled cover of the book, trying without success to shut the voice out of his consciousness. It was at night that they came for him. Always at night. The proper thing was to kill yourself before they got you. Undoubtedly, some people did so. Many of the disappearances were actually suicides. But it needed desperate courage to kill yourself in a world where firearms or any quick and certain poison were completely unprocurable. He thought with a kind of astonishment of the biological uselessness of pain and fear, the treachery of the human body which always freezes into inertia at exactly the moment when a special effort is needed. He might have silenced the dark-haired girl if only he had acted quickly enough, but precisely because of the extremity of his danger he had lost the power to act. It struck him that in moments of crisis one is never fighting against an external enemy, but always against one's own body. Even now, in spite of the gin, the dull ache in his belly made consecutive thought impossible. And it is the same, he perceived, in all seemingly heroic or tragic situations. On the battlefield, in the torture chamber, on a sinking ship, the issues that you are fighting for are always forgotten, because the body swells up until it fills the universe, and even when you are not paralyzed by fright or screaming with pain, life is a moment-to-moment struggle against hunger or cold or sleeplessness, against a sour stomach or an aching tooth. He opened the diary. It was important to write something down. The woman on the telescreen had started a new song. Her voice seemed to stick into his brain like jagged splinters of glass. He tried to think of O'Brien, for whom or to whom the diary was written, but instead he began thinking of the thing that would happen to him after the thought waves took him away. It would not matter if they killed you at once. To be killed was what you expected. But before death, no one spoke of such things, yet everybody knew of them. There was the routine of confession that had to be gone through, the groveling on the floor and screaming for mercy, the crack of broken bones, the smashed teeth and bloody clots of hair. Why did you have to endure it, since the end was always the same? Why was it not possible to cut a few days or weeks out of your life? Nobody ever escaped detection, and nobody ever failed to confess. When once you had succumbed to thought crime, it was certain that by a given date you would be dead. Why then did that horror which halted nothing have to lie embedded in future time? He tried, with a little more success than before, to summon up the image of O'Brien. "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness," O'Brien said to him. He knew what it meant, or thought he knew. The place where there is no darkness was the imagined future, which one would never see, but which, by foreknowledge, one could mystically share. But with the voice from the telescreen nagging at his ears, he could not follow the train of thought further. He put a cigarette in his mouth. Half the tobacco promptly fell out onto his tongue, a bitter dust which was difficult to spit out again. The face of Big Brother swam into his mind, displacing that of O'Brien. Just as he had done a few days earlier, he slid a coin out of his pocket and looked at it. The face gazed up at him, heavy, calm, protective. But what kind of smile was hidden beneath the dark mustache? Like a leaden knell, the words came back. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Part 2. It was the middle of the morning, and Winston had left his cubicle to go to the lavatory. A solitary figure was coming toward him from the other end of the long and brightly lit pond. It was the girl with dark hair. 4 days had gone past since the evening when he had run into her outside the junk shop. As she came nearer, he saw that her right arm was in a sling, not noticeable at a distance because it was of the same color as her overalls. Probably she had crushed her hand while swinging round one of the big kaleidoscopes on which the plots of novels were roughed in. It was a common accident in the fiction. They were perhaps 4 meters apart when the girl stumbled and fell almost flat on her face. A sharp cry of pain was wrung out of her. She must have fallen right on the injured arm. Winston stopped short. The girl had risen to her knees. Her face had turned a milky yellow color against which her mouth stood out redder than ever. Her eyes were fixed on his with an appealing expression that looked more like fear than pain. A curious emotion stirred in Winston's heart. In front of him was an enemy who was trying to kill him. In front of him also was a human creature, in pain and perhaps with a broken bone. Already he had instinctively started forward. In the moment when he had seen her fall on the bandaged arm, it had been as though he felt the pain in his own body. "You're hurt?" he said. "It's nothing. My arm. It'll be all right in a second." She spoke as though her heart were fluttering. She had certainly turned very pale. "You haven't broken?" "No. All right. It hurt for a moment, that's all." She held out her free hand to him, and he helped her up. She had regained some of her color and appeared very much better. "It's nothing," she repeated shortly. I only gave my wrist a bit of a bend. Thanks, Tom. And with that, she walked on in the direction in which she had been going, as briskly as though it had really been nothing. The whole incident could not have taken as much as half a minute. Not to let one's feelings appear in one's face was a habit that had acquired the status of an instinct. And in any case, they had been standing straight in front of the telescreen when the thing happened. Nevertheless, it had been very difficult not to betray a momentary surprise, for in the 2 or 3 seconds while he was helping her up, the girl had slipped something into his hand. There was no question that she had done it intentionally. It was something small and flat. As he passed through the lavatory door, he transferred it to his pocket and felt it with the tips of his fingers. It was a scrap of paper folded into a square. While he stood at the urinal, he managed, with a little more fingering, to get it unfolded. Obviously, there must be a message of some kind written. For a moment, he was tempted to take it into one of the water closets and read it at once. But that would be shocking folly, as he well knew. There was no place where you could be more certain that the telescreens were watched continuously. He went back to his cubicle, sat down, threw the fragment of paper casually among the other papers on the desk, put on his spectacles, and hitched the speaker to him. 5 minutes, he told himself. 5 minutes at the very least. His heart bumped in his breast with frightening loudness. Fortunately, the piece of work he was engaged on was mere routine, the rectification of a long list of figures not needing close attention. Whatever was written on the paper, it must have some kind of political meaning. So far as he could see, there were 2 possibilities. One, much the more likely, was that the girl was an agent of the Thought Police, just as he had feared. He did not know why the Thought Police should choose to deliver their messages in such a fashion. Perhaps they had their reasons. The thing that was written on the paper might be a threat, a summons, an order to commit suicide, a trap of some description. But there was another, wilder possibility that kept raising its head, though he tried vainly to suppress it. This was that the message did not come from the Thought Police at all, but from some kind of underground organization. Perhaps the Brotherhood existed after all. Perhaps the girl was part of it. No doubt the idea was absurd, but it had sprung into his mind in the very instant of feeling the scrap of paper in his hand. It was not till a couple of minutes later that the other, more probable explanation had occurred. And even now, though his intellect told him that the message probably meant death, still, that was not what he believed. And the unreasonable hope persisted, and his heart banged, and it was with difficulty that it kept his voice from trembling as he murmured his figures into the speaker. He rolled up the completed bundle of work and slid it into the pneumatic tube. 8 minutes had gone by. He readjusted his spectacles on his nose, sighed, and drew the next batch of work toward him with a scrap of paper on top. He flattened it out. On it was written in large, unformed handwriting, "I love you." For several seconds he was too stunned even to throw the incriminating thing into the memory. When he did so, although he knew very well the danger of showing too much interest, he could not resist reading it once again, just to make sure that the words were really there. For the rest of the morning it was very difficult to work. What was even worse than having to focus his mind on a series of niggling jobs was the need to conceal his agitation from the telescope. He felt as though a fire were burning in his belly. Lunch in the hot, crowded, noise-filled canteen was torment. He had hoped to be alone for a little while during the lunch hour, but as bad luck would have it, the imbecile Parsons flopped down beside him, the tang of his sweat almost defeating the tinny smell of stew. He kept up a stream of talk about the preparations for hate week. He was particularly enthusiastic about a papier-mâché model of Big Brother's head, 2 meters wide, which was being made for the occasion by his daughter's troop of spies. The irritating thing was that in the racket of voices, Winston could hardly hear what Parsons was saying, and was constantly having to ask for some fatuous remark to be repeated. Just once he caught a glimpse of the girl, at a table with 2 other girls at the far end of the room. She appeared not to have seen him, and he did not look in that direction again. The afternoon was more bearable. Immediately after lunch, there arrived a delicate, difficult piece of work, which would take several hours and necessitated putting everything else aside. It consisted in falsifying a series of production reports of 2 years ago in such a way as to cast discredit on a prominent member of the inner party who was now under a cloud. This was the kind of thing that Winston was good at, and for more than 2 hours he succeeded in shutting the girl out of his mind altogether. Then the memory of her face came back, and with it a raging, intolerable desire to be alone. Until he could be alone, it was impossible to think this new development out. Tonight was one of his nights at the community center. He wolfed another tasteless meal in the canteen, hurried off to the center, took part in the solemn foolery of a discussion group, played 2 games of table tennis, swallowed several glasses of gin, and sat for half an hour through a lecture entitled INSOC in relation to chess. His soul writhed with boredom, but for once he had had no impulse to shirk his evening at the center. At the sight of the words, "I love you," the desire to stay alive had welled up in him, and the taking of minor risks suddenly seemed stupid. It was not till 23 hours, when he was home and in bed, and in the darkness where you were safe even from the telescreen so long as you kept silent, that he was able to think continuously. It was a physical problem that had to be solved. How to get in touch with the girl and arrange a meeting. He did not consider any longer the possibility that she might be laying some kind of trap for him. He knew that it was not so because of her unmistakable agitation when she handed him the note. Obviously, she had been frightened out of her wits, as well she might be. Nor did the idea of refusing her advances even cross his mind. Only 5 nights ago he had contemplated smashing her skull in with a cobblestone, but that was of no importance. He thought of her naked, youthful body as he had seen it in his dream. He had imagined her a fool, like all the rest of them, her head stuffed with lies and hatred, her belly full of ice. A kind of fever seized him at the thought that he might lose her. The white, youthful body might slip away from him. What he feared more than anything else was that she would simply change her mind if he did not get in touch with her quickly. But the physical difficulty of meeting was enormous. It was like trying to make a move at chess when you were already mated. Whichever way you turned, the telescreen faced you. Actually, all the possible ways of communicating with her had occurred to him within 5 minutes of reading the note. But now, with time to think, he went over them one by one, as though laying out a row of instruments on the table. Obviously, the kind of encounter that had happened this morning could not be repeated. If she had worked in the records department, it might have been comparatively simple, but he had only a very dim idea whereabouts in the building the fiction department lay, and he had no pretext for going there. If he had known where she lived, and at what time she left work, he could have contrived to meet her somewhere on her way home. But to try to follow her was not safe, because it would mean loitering about outside the ministry, which was bound to be noticed. As for sending a letter through the mails, it was out of the question. By a routine that was not even secret, all letters were opened in transit. Actually, few people ever wrote them. For the message that it was occasionally necessary to send, there were printed postcards with long lists of phrases, and you struck out the ones that were inapplicable. In any case, he did not know the girl's name, let alone her address. Finally, he decided that the safest place was the canteen. If he could get her at a table by herself, somewhere in the middle of the room, not too near the telescreens, and with a sufficient buzz of conversation all around, if these conditions endured for, say, 30 seconds, it might be possible to exchange a few words. For a week after this, life was like a restless dream. On the next day, she did not appear in the canteen until he was leaving, the whistle having already blown. Presumably, she had been changed onto a later shift. They passed each other without a glance. On the day after that, she was in the canteen at the usual time, but with 3 other girls and immediately under a telescreen. Then, for 3 dreadful days, she did not appear at all. His whole mind and body seemed to be afflicted with an unbearable sensitivity, a sort of transparency, which made every movement, every sound, every contact, every word that he had to speak or listen to an agony. Even in his sleep, he could not altogether escape from her image. He did not touch the diary during those days. If there was any relief, it was in his work, in which he could sometimes forget himself for 10 minutes at a stretch. He had absolutely no clue as to what had happened to her. There was no inquiry he could make. She might have been vaporized. She might have committed suicide. She might have been transferred to the other end of Oceania. Worst and likeliest of all, she might simply have changed her mind and decided to avoid him. The next day, she reappeared. Her arm was out of the sling, and she had a band of sticking plaster around her wrist. The relief of seeing her was so great that he could not resist staring directly at her for several seconds. On the following day, he very nearly succeeded in speaking to her. When he came into the canteen, she was sitting at a table well out from the wall and was quite alone. It was early, and the place was not very full. The queue edged forward till Winston was almost at the counter, then was held up for 2 minutes because someone in front was complaining that he had not received his tablet of saccharin. The girl was still alone when Winston secured his tray and began to make for her table. He walked casually toward her, his eyes searching for a place at some table beyond her. She was perhaps 3 meters away from him. Another 2 seconds would do it. Then a voice behind him called, "Smith!" He pretended not to hear. "Smith!" repeated the voice more loudly. It was no use. He turned round. A blonde-headed, silly-faced young man named Wilshire, whom he barely knew, was inviting him with a smile to a vacant place at his table. It was not safe to refuse. After having been recognized, he could not go and sit at a table with an unattended girl. It was too noticeable. He sat down with a friendly smile. The silly blonde face beamed into his. Winston had a hallucination of himself smashing a pickaxe right into the middle. The girl's table filled up a few minutes later. But she must have seen him coming toward her, and perhaps she would take the hint. Next day he took care to arrive early. Sure enough, she was at a table in about the same place, and again alone. The person immediately ahead of him in the queue was a small, swiftly moving, beetle-like man with a flat face and tiny, suspicious eyes. As Winston turned away from the counter with his tray, he saw that the little man was making straight for the girl's table. His hopes sank again. There was a vacant place at a table farther away, but something in the little man's appearance suggested that he would be sufficiently attentive to his own comfort to choose the emptiest table. With ice at his heart, Winston followed. It was no use unless he could get the girl alone. At this moment there was a tremendous crash. The little man was sprawling on all fours. His tray had gone flying. 2 streams of soup and coffee were flowing across the floor. He started to his feet with a malignant glance at Winston, whom he evidently suspected of having tripped him up. It was all right. 5 seconds later, with a thundering heart, Winston was sitting at the girl's table. He did not look at her. He unpacked his tray and promptly began eating. It was all important to speak at once before anyone else came, but now a terrible fear had taken possession of her. A week had gone by since she had first approached. It would have changed her mind. She must have changed her mind. It was impossible that this affair should end successfully. Such things did not happen in real life. He might have flinched altogether from speaking if at this moment he had not seen Ampleforth, the hairy-eared poet, wandering limply round the room with a tray looking for a place to sit down. In his vague way, Ampleforth was attached to Winston and would certainly sit down at his table if he caught sight of him. There was perhaps a minute in which to act. Both Winston and the girl were eating steadily. The stuff they were eating was a thin stew, actually a soup of haricot beans. In a low murmur, Winston began speaking. Neither of them looked up. Steadily they spooned the watery stuff into their mouths, and between spoonfuls exchanged the few necessary words in low, expressionless voices. "What time do you leave work?" 18:30. "Where can we meet?" "Victory Square, near the monument. It's full of terror screens. It doesn't matter if there's a crowd." "Will you signal?" "No. Don't come up to me until you see me among a lot of people. And don't look at me, just keep somewhere near. What time?" 19 hours. All right. Ampleforth failed to see Winston and sat down at another table. The girl finished her lunch quickly and made off, while Winston stayed to smoke a cigarette. They did not speak again, and so far as it was possible for 2 people sitting on opposite sides of the same table, they did not look at her. Winston was in Victory Square before the appointed time. He wandered around the base of the enormous fluted column, at the top of which Big Brother's statue gazed southward toward the skies where he had vanquished the Eurasian airplanes, the East Asian airplanes it had been a few years ago, in the Battle of Airstrip 1. In the street in front of it there was a statue of a man on horseback, which was supposed to represent Oliver Cromwell. At 5 minutes past the hour, the girl still had not appeared. Again the terrible fear seized upon Winston. She was not coming. She had changed her mind. He walked slowly up to the north side of the square and got a sort of pale-colored pleasure from identifying St. Martin's Church, whose bells, when it had bells, had chimed, "You owe me 3 farthings." Then he saw the girl, standing at the base of the monument, reading or pretending to read a poster which ran spirally up the column. It was not safe to go near her until some more people accumulated. There were telescreens all around the ground. But at this moment there was a din of shouting and a zoom of heavy vehicles from somewhere to the left. Suddenly everyone seemed to be running across the square. The girl nipped nimbly round the lions at the base of the monument and joined in the rush. Winston followed. As he ran, he gathered from some shouted remarks that a convoy of Eurasian prisoners was passing. Already a dense mass of people was blocking the south side of the square. Winston, at normal times the kind of person who gravitates to the outer edge of any kind of scrimmage, shoved, butted, squirmed his way forward into the heart of the crowd. Soon he was within arm's length of the girl, but the way was blocked by an enormous prole and an almost equally enormous woman, presumably his wife, who seemed to form an impenetrable wall of flesh. Winston wriggled himself sideways and with a violent lunge managed to drive his shoulder between them. For a moment it felt as though his entrails were being ground to pulp between the two muscular hips. Then he had broken through, sweating. He was next to the girl. They were shoulder to shoulder, both staring fixedly in front of them. A long line of trucks with wooden-faced guards armed with submachine guns standing upright in each corner was passing slowly down the street. In the trucks, little yellow men in shabby greenish uniforms were squatting, jammed close together. Their sad Mongolian faces gazed out over the sides of the trucks, utterly incurious. Occasionally, when a truck jolted, there was a clank-clank of metal. All the prisoners were wearing leg irons. Truckload after truckload of the sad faces passed. Winston knew they were there, but he saw them only intermittently. The girl's shoulder and her right arm down to the elbow were pressed against his. Her cheek was almost near enough for him to feel its warmth. She had immediately taken charge of the situation, just as she had done in the canteen. She began speaking in the same expressionless voice as before, with lips barely moving, a mere murmur easily drowned by the din of voices and the rumbling of the trucks. "You hear me?" "Yes." "You get Sunday afternoon off?" "Yes." "Then listen carefully. You'll have to remember this. Go to Paddington Station." With a sort of military precision that astonished him, she outlined the route that he was to follow. A half-hour railway journey, turn left outside the station, 2 kilometers along the road, a gate with the top bar missing, a path across a field, a grass-grown lane, a track between bushes, a dead tree with moss on it. It was as though she had a map inside of her head. "Can you remember all that?" he murmured finally. "Yes." "You turn left, then right, then left it, and the gate's got no top bar." "Yes? What time?" "About 15. You may have to wait. I'll get there by another way. Are you sure you remember everything?" "Yes." "Get away from me as quick as you can." She need not have told him that, but for the moment they could not extricate themselves from the crowd. The trucks were still filing past, the people still insatiably gaping. At the start there had been a few boos and hisses, but it came only from the party members among the crowd, and that soon stopped. The prevailing emotion was simply curiosity. Foreigners, whether from Eurasia or from East Asia, were a kind of strange animal. One literally never saw them, except in the guise of prisoners, and even as prisoners one never got more than a momentary glimpse of them. Nor did one know what became of them. Apart from a few who were hanged as war criminals, the others simply vanished, presumably into forced labor camps. The round Mongol faces had given way to faces of a more European type, dirty, bearded, and exhausted. From over scrubby cheekbones, eyes looked into Winston, sometimes with strange intensity, and flashed away again. The convoy was drawing to an end. In the last truck, he could see an aged man, his face a mass of grizzled hair, standing upright with wrists crossed in front of him, as though he were used to having them bound together. It was almost time for Winston and the girl to part. But at the last moment, while the crowd still hemmed them in, her hand felt for his and gave it a fleeting squeeze. It would not have been 10 seconds, and yet it seemed a long time that their hands were clasped together. He had time to learn every detail of her hand. He explored the long fingers, the shapely nails, the work-hardened palm with its row of calluses, the smooth flesh under the wrist. Merely from feeling it, he would have known it by sight. In the same instant, it occurred to him that he did not know what color the girl's eyes were. They were probably brown, but people with dark hair sometimes had blue. To turn his head and look at her would have been inconceivable folly. With hands locked together, invisible among the press of bodies, they stared steadily in front of them. And instead of the eyes of the girl, the eyes of the aged prisoner gazed mournfully at Winston with nests of hair. Chapter 2. Winston picked his way up the lane through dappled light and shade, stepping out into pools of gold whenever the boughs parted. Under the trees to the left of them, the ground was misty with bluebells. The air seemed to kiss one's skin. It was the 2nd of May. From somewhere deeper in the heart of the wood came the droning of ring bells. He was a bit warm. There had been no difficulties about the journey, and the girl was so evidently experienced that he was less frightened than he would normally have been. Presumably, she could be trusted to find a safe place. In general, you could not assume that you were much safer in the country than in London. There were no telescreens, of course, but there was always the danger of concealed microphones by which your voice might be picked up and recognized. Besides, it was not easy to make a journey by yourself without attracting attention. For distances of less than 100 kilometers, it was not necessary to get your passport endorsed. But sometimes there were patrols hanging about the railway stations who examined the papers of any party member they found there and asked awkward questions. However, no patrols had appeared, and on the walk from the station he had made sure by cautious backward glances that he was not being followed. The train was full of proles, in holiday mood because of the summery weather. The wooden-seated carriage in which he traveled was filled to overflowing by a single enormous family ranging from a toothless great-grandmother to a month-old baby, going out to spend an afternoon with in-laws in the country, and as they freely explained to Winston, to get hold of a little black-market butter. The lane widened, and in a minute he came to the footpath she had told him, a mere cattle creek which plunged between the bushes. He had no watch, but it could not be 15. The bluebells were so thick underfoot that it was impossible not to tread them. He knelt down and began picking some, partly to pass the time, but also from a vague idea that he would like to have a bunch of flowers to offer to the girl when they met. He had got together a big bunch and was smelling their faint, sickly scent. The sound of his back frozen, the unmistakable crackle of a foot on the twigs. He went on picking bluebells. It was the best thing to do. It might be the girl, or he might have been followed after all. To look round was to show guilt. He picked another, and another. A hand fell lightly on his shoulder. He looked up. It was the girl. She shook her head, evidently as a warning that he must keep silent, then parted the bushes and quickly led the way along the narrow track into the wood. Obviously, she had been that way before, for she dodged the boggy pits as though by habit. Winston followed, still clasping his bunch of flowers. His first feeling was relief, but as he watched the strong, slender body moving in front of him, with the scarlet sash that was just tight enough to bring out the curve of her hips, the sense of his own inferiority was heavy upon him. Even now it seemed quite likely that when she turned round and looked at him, he would draw back after all. The sweetness of the air and the greenness of the leaves daunted him. Already on the walk from the station, the May sunshine had made him feel dirty and heated, a creature of indoors with the sooty dust of London in the pores of his skin. It occurred to him that till now she had probably never seen him in broad daylight in the open. He came to the fallen tree that she had spoken of. The girl hopped over and forced apart the bushes, in which there did not seem to be an opening. When Winston followed her, he found that they were in a natural clearing, a tiny, grassy knoll surrounded by tall saplings that shut it in completely. The girl stopped and turned. "Here we are," she said. He was facing her at several paces' distance. As yet he did not dare move nearer to her. "I didn't want to say anything in the lane," she went on, "in case there's a mic in there. I don't suppose there is, but there could be. There's always the chance of one of those swine recognizing your voice. We're all right here." He still had not the courage to approach her. "We're all right here?" he repeated stupidly. "Yes, look at the trees." They were small ashes, which at some time had been cut down and had sprouted up again into a forest of poles, none of them thicker than one's wrist. There's nothing big enough to hide in that. Besides, I've been here before. They were only making conversation. He had managed to move closer to her now. She stood before him very upright, with a smile on her face that looked faintly ironic, as though she were wondering why he was so slow to act. The bluebells had cascaded onto the ground. It seemed to have fallen of their own accord. He took her hand. "Would you believe," he said, "that till this moment I didn't know what color your eyes were? They were brown, a rather light shade of brown, with dark lashes. Now that you've seen what I'm really like, can you still bear to look at me?" "Yes, easily. I'm 39 years old. I've got a wife that I can't get rid of. I've got varicose veins. I've got 5 false teeth. I couldn't care less," said the girl. The next moment, it was hard to say by whose act, she was in his arms. At the beginning he had no feeling except sheer incredulity. The youthful body was strained against his own. The mass of dark hair was against his face. And yes, actually she had turned her face up and he was kissing the wide red mouth. She had clasped her arms about his neck. She was calling him darling, precious one, loved one. He had pulled her down to the ground. She was utterly unresisting. He could do what he liked with her. But the truth was that he had no physical sensation except that of mere contact. All he felt was incredulity and pride. He was glad that this was happening, but he had no physical desire. It was too soon. Her youth and prettiness had frightened him. He was too much used to living without women. He did not know the reason. The girl picked herself up and pulled a bluebell out of her hair. She sat against him, putting her arm round his waist. Never mind, dear. There's no hurry. We've got the whole afternoon. Isn't this a splendid hideout? I found it when I got lost once on a community hike. If anyone was coming, you could hear them 100 meters away. What is your name? Said Winston. Julia. I know yours. It's Winston. Winston Smith. How did you find that out? I expect I'm better at finding things out than you are, dear. Tell me, what did you think of me before that day I gave you the note? He did not feel any temptation to tell lies to her. It was even a sort of love for him to start off by telling the worst. I hated the sight of you, he said. I wanted to rape you and then murder you afterwards. 2 weeks ago I thought seriously of smashing your head in with a cobblestone. If you really want to know, I imagined that you had something to do with the thought police. The girl laughed delightedly, evidently taking this as a tribute to the excellence of her disguise. Not the thought police. You didn't honestly think that. Well, perhaps not exactly that. But from your general appearance, merely because you're young and fresh and healthy, you understand, I thought that probably you thought I was a good party man. Pure in word and deed. Banners, processions, slogans, games, community hikes, all that stuff. And you thought that if I had a quarter of a chance, I'd denounce you as a thought criminal and get you killed off? Yes, something of that kind. A great many young girls are like that, you know. It's this bloody thing that does it, she said, ripping off the scarlet sash of the Junior Anti-Sex League and flinging it onto her bow. Then, as though touching her waist had reminded her of something, she felt in the pocket of her overalls and produced a small slab of chocolate. She broke it in half and gave one of the pieces to Winston. Even before he had taken it, he knew by the smell that it was very unusual chocolate. It was dark and shiny and was wrapped in silver paper. Chocolate normally was dull, brown, crumbly stuff that tasted as nearly as one could describe it like the smoke of a rubbish fire. But sometime or another he had tasted chocolate like the piece she had given. The first whiff of its scent had stirred up some memory which he could not pin down, but which was powerful, troubling. Where did you get this stuff? He said. Black market, he said indifferently. Actually, I am that sort of girl to look at. I'm good at games. I was a troop leader in the Spies. I do voluntary work 3 evenings a week for the Junior Anti-Sex League. Hours and hours I've spent pasting their bloody rot all over London. I always carry one end of a banner in the processions. I always look cheerful, and I never shirk anything. Always yell with the crowd. That's what I say. It's the only way to be safe. The first fragment of chocolate had melted on Winston's tongue. The taste was delightful. But there was still that memory moving round the edges of his consciousness, something strongly felt but not reducible to definite shape, like an object seen out of the corner of one's eye. He pushed it away from him, aware only that it was the memory of some action which he would have liked to undo but couldn't. You are very young, he said. You are 10 or 15 years younger than I am. What could you see to attract you in a man like me? There was something in your face. I thought I'd take a chance. I'm good at spotting people who don't belong. As soon as I saw you, I knew you were against them. Them, it appeared, meant the party. And above all, the inner party, about whom she talked with an open, jeering hatred, which made Winston feel uneasy, although he knew that they were safe here if they could be safe anywhere. A thing that astonished him about her was the coarseness of her language. Party members were supposed not to swear, and Winston himself very seldom did swear, aloud at any rate. Julia, however, seemed unable to mention the party, and especially the inner party, without using the kind of words that you saw chalked up in dripping alleyways. He did not dislike it. It was merely one symptom of a revolt against the party in all its ways, and somehow it seemed natural and healthy, like the sneeze of a horse that smells bad hay. They had left the clearing and were wandering again through the checkered shade with their arms round each other's waists whenever it was wide enough to walk two abreast. He noticed how much softer her waist seemed to feel now that the sash was gone. They did not speak above a whisper. Outside the clearing, Julia said it was better to go quiet. Presently they had reached the edge of the little wood. She stopped him. "Don't go out into the open. There might be someone watching. We're all right if we keep behind the bough." They were standing in the shade of hazel bushes. The sunlight filtering through innumerable leaves was still hot on their faces. Winston looked out into the field beyond and underwent a curious, slow shock of recognition. He knew it by sight. An old, close-bitten pasture with a footpath wandering across it and a molehill here and there. In the ragged edge on the opposite side, the boughs of the elm trees swayed just perceptibly in the breeze, and their leaves stirred faintly in dense masses like women's hair. Surely somewhere nearby, but out of sight, there must be a stream, green pools where dace were swimming. "Isn't there a stream somewhere near here?" he whispered. "That's right, there is a stream. It's at the edge of the next field. There are fish in it, great big ones. We can watch them lying in the pools under the willow tree, waving their tail. It's the golden country, you know. The golden country. It's nothing really, a landscape I've seen sometimes in a dream." "Look," whispered Julia. A thrush had alighted on a bough not 5 meters away, almost at the level of their faces. Perhaps they did not see it. It was in the sun, lay in the shade. It spread out its wings, fitted them carefully into place again, ducked its head for a moment as though making a sort of obeisance to the sun, and then began to pour forth a torrent of song. In the afternoon hush, the volume of sound was startling. Winston and Julia clung together, fascinated. The music went on, minute after minute, with astonishing variations, never once repeating itself, almost as though the bird were deliberately showing off its virtuosity. Sometimes it stopped for a few seconds, spread out and resettled its wings, then swelled its speckled breast and again burst into song. Winston watched it with a sort of vague reverence. For whom, for what was that bird singing? No mate, no rival was watching it. What made it sit at the edge of the lonely wood and pour its music into nothingness? He wondered whether after all there was a microphone hidden somewhere near. He and Julia had only spoken in low whispers and it would not pick up what they had said, but it would pick up the thrush. Perhaps at the other end of the instrument some small beetle-like man was listening intently, listening to that. But by degrees the flood of music drove all speculation out of his mind. It was as though it were a kind of liquid stuff that poured all over him and got mixed up with the sunlight that filtered through the leaves. He stopped thinking and merely felt. The girl's waist in the bend of his arm was soft and warm. He pulled her round so that they were breast to breast. Her body seemed to melt into his. Wherever his hands moved, it was all as yielding as water. Their mouths clung together. It was quite different from the hard kisses they had exchanged earlier. When they moved their faces apart again, both of them sighed deeply. The bird took fright and fled with a clatter of wings. Winston put his lips against her ear. "Now," he whispered. "Not here," she whispered. "Come back to the hideout, safer." Quickly, with an occasional crackle of twigs, they threaded their way back to the clearing. When they were once inside the ring of saplings, she turned and faced him. They were both breathing fast, but a smile had reappeared round the corners of their mouth. She stood looking at him for an instant, then felt at the zipper of her overalls. And yes, it was almost as in his dream. Almost as swiftly as he had imagined it, she had torn her clothes off. And when she flung them aside, it was with that same magnificent gesture by which a whole civilization seemed to be annihilated. Her body gleamed white in the sun. But for a moment he did not look at her. His eyes were anchored by the freckled face with its faint, bold smile. He knelt down before her and took her hands in his. "Have you done this before?" "Of course. Hundreds of times. Well, scores of times, anyway. With party members. Yes, always with members of the inner. Not with those swine. But there's plenty that would, if they got half a chance, then that's a wholly different matter." His heart leapt. Scores of times she had done it. He wished it had been hundreds, thousands. Anything that hinted at corruption always filled him with a wild hope. Who knew? Perhaps the party was rotten under the surface, its cult of strenuousness and self-denial simply a sham concealing iniquity. If he could have infected the whole lot of them with leprosy or syphilis, how gladly he would have done so. Anything to rot, to weaken, to undermine. He pulled her down so that they were kneeling face to face. Listen, the more men you've had, the more I love you. Do you understand that? Yes, perfectly. I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want any virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the bones. Well, then I ought to suit you, dear. I'm corrupt to the bones. You like doing this? I don't mean simply me. I mean the thing in itself. Adore it. That was above all what he wanted to hear. Not merely the love of one person, but the animal instinct, the simple, undifferentiated desire. That was the force that would tear the party to pieces. He pressed her down upon the grass among the fallen bluebells. This time there was no difficulty. Presently the rising and falling of their breasts slowed to normal speed, and in a sort of pleasant helplessness they fell apart. The sun seemed to have grown hotter. They were both sleepy. He reached out for the discarded overalls and pulled them partly over. Almost immediately they fell asleep and slept for about half an hour. Winston woke first. He sat and watched the freckled face, still peacefully asleep, pillowed on the palm of her hand. Except for her mouth, you could not call her beautiful. There was a line or two around the eyes if you looked closely. The short, dark hair was extraordinarily thick and soft. It occurred to him that he still did not know her surname or where she lived. The young, strong body, now helpless and sleepy, awoke in him a pity, protecting fear. But the mindless tenderness that he had felt under the hazel tree while the thrush was singing had not quite come back. He pulled the overalls aside and studied her smooth, white flank. In the old days, he thought, a man looked at a girl's body and saw that it was desirable, and that was the end of the story. But you could not have pure love or pure lust nowadays. No emotion was pure, because everything was mixed up with fear, hatred. Their embrace had been a battle, the climax of victory. It was a blow struck against the party. It was a political act. Chapter 3. He can come here once again, if you want. It's generally safe to use any kind of once, but not for another month or two. As soon as she woke up, her demeanor had changed. She became alert and businesslike, put her clothes on, knotted the scarlet sash about her waist, and began arranging the details of the journey home. It seemed natural to leave this to her. She obviously had practical cunning, which Winston lacked, and she seemed also to have an exhaustive knowledge of the countryside around London, stored away from innumerable community hubs. The route she gave him was quite different from the one by which he had come, and brought him out at a different railway station. Never go home the same way as you went out, he said, as though enunciating an important general principle. She would leave first, and Winston was to wait half an hour before following. She had named the place where they could meet after work 4 evenings hence. It was the street in one of the poorer quarters where there was an open market which was generally crowded and noisy. She would be hanging about among the stalls, pretending to be in search of the shoelaces or sewing. If she judged that the coast was clear, she would blow her nose when he approached. Otherwise, he was to walk past her without recognition. But with luck, in the middle of the crowd, it would be safe to talk for a quarter of an hour and arrange another meal. And now I must go, she said, as soon as he had mastered his instructions. I'm due back at 19:30. I've got to put in 2 hours for the Junior Anti-Sex League, handing out leaflets or something. Isn't it bloody? Give me a brush down, would you? I've got any twigs in my hand. You sure? And goodbye, my love. Goodbye. She flung herself into his arms, kissed him almost violently, and a moment later pushed her way through the saplings and disappeared into the wood with very little noise. Even now he had not found out her surname or her address. However, it made no difference, for it was inconceivable that they could ever meet indoors or exchange any kind of written communication. As it happened, they never went back to the clearing of the wood. During the month of May, there was only one further occasion on which they actually succeeded in making love. That was in another hiding place known to Julie, the belfry of a ruined church in an almost deserted stretch of country where an atomic bomb had fallen 30 years earlier. It was a good hiding place when once you got there, but the getting there was very dangerous. For the rest, they could only meet in the streets, in a different place every evening, and never for more than half an hour at a time. In the street, it was usually possible to talk after a fashion. As they drifted down the crowded pavements, not quite abreast and never looking at one another, they carried on a curious, intermittent conversation which flicked on and off like the beams of a lighthouse, suddenly nipped into silence by the approach of a party uniform or the proximity of a telescreen, then taken up again minutes later in the middle of a sentence, then abruptly cut short as they parted at the agreed spot, then continued almost without introduction on the following day. Julia appeared to be quite used to this kind of conversation, which she called talking by installments. She was also surprisingly adept at speaking without moving her lips. Just once in almost a month of nightly meetings, they managed to exchange a kiss. They were passing in silence down a side street. Julia would never speak when they were away from the main streets. When there was a deafening roar, the earth heaved and the air darkened, and Winston found himself lying on his side, bruised and terrified. A rocket bomb must have dropped quite near at hand. Suddenly he became aware of Julia's face, a few centimeters from his own, deathly white as chalk. Even her lips were. She was dead. He clasped her against him and found that he was kissing a live, warm face. But there was some powdery stuff that got in the way of his lips. Both of their faces were thickly coated with porcelain. There were evenings when they reached their rendezvous and then had to walk past one another without a sign because a patrol had just come around the corner or a helicopter was hovering overhead. Even if it had been less dangerous, it would still have been difficult to find time to meet. Winston's working week was 60 hours, Julia's was even longer, and their free days varied according to the pressure of work and did not often coincide. Julia, in any case, seldom had an evening completely free. She spent an astonishing amount of time in attending lectures and demonstrations, distributing literature for the Junior Anti-Sex League, preparing banners for Hate Week, making collections for the Savings Campaign and such like activities. It paid, she said. It was camouflage. If you kept the small rules, you could break the big ones. She even induced Winston to mortgage yet another of his evenings by enrolling himself for the part-time munition group, which was done voluntarily by zealous party members. So, one evening every week, Winston spent 4 hours of paralyzing boredom screwing together small bits of metal, which were probably parts of bomb fuses, in a drafty, ill-lit workshop where the knocking of hammers mingled drearily with the music of the telescreens. When they met in the church tower, the gaps in their fragmentary conversation were filled up. It was a blazing afternoon. The air in the little square chamber above the bells was hot and stagnant and smelt overpoweringly of pigeon dung. They sat talking for hours on the dusty, twig-littered floor, one or other of them getting up from time to time to cast a glance through the narrow slits and make sure that no one was coming. Julia was 26 years old. She lived in a hostel with 30 other girls, always in the stink of women. How I hate women, she said, apparently. And she worked, as he had guessed, on the novel-writing machines in the fiction department. She enjoyed her work, which consisted chiefly in running and servicing a powerful but tricky electric motor. She was, she said, not clever, but was fond of using her hands and felt at home with machinery. She could describe the whole process of composing a novel from the general directive issued by the planning committee down to the final touching up by the rewrite squad. But she was not interested in the finished product. She didn't much care for reading, she said. Books were just a commodity that had to be produced, like jam, bookcases. She had no memories of anything before the early 60s, and the only person she had ever known who talked frequently of the days before the revolution was a grandfather who had disappeared when she was 8. At school, she had been captain of the hockey team and had won the gymnastics trophy 2 years running. She had been a troop leader in the Spies and a branch secretary in the Youth League before joining the Junior Anti-Sex League. She had always borne an excellent character. She had even an infallible mark of good reputation, been picked out to work in porno set, the subsection of the fiction department which turned out cheap pornography for distribution among the proles. It was nicknamed Muck House by the people who worked in it, she remembered. There she had remained for a year, helping to produce booklets and sealed packets with titles like Spanking Stories or One Night in a Girls' School, to be bought furtively by proletarian youths who were under the impression that they were buying something illegal. What are these books like? Said Winston curiously. Oh, ghastly rubbish. They're boring. They only have 6 plots, but they swap them around. Of course, I was only in kaleidoscopes. I was never into reading, but not literary. Not even enough for that. He learned with astonishment that all the workers in Pornosec, except the head of the department, were girls. The theory was that men, whose sex instincts were less controllable than those of women, were in greater danger of being corrupted by the filth they handled. They don't even like having married women. Girls are always supposed to be so pure. Here's one who isn't. She had had her first love affair when she was 16 with a party member of 60 who later committed suicide to avoid arrest. And a good job, too, said Julie. Otherwise, they'd have had my name out for me, confess. Since then, there had been various others. Life, as she saw it, was quite simple. You wanted a good time. They, meaning the party, wanted to stop you. You broke the rules as best you could. She seemed to think it just as natural that they should want to rob you of your pleasures as that you should want to avoid being caught. She hated the party and said so in the crudest words, but she made no general criticism. Except where it touched upon her own life, she had no interest in party gossip. He noticed that she never used newspeak words except the ones that had passed into everyday use. She had never heard of a brother who refused to believe in its existence. Any kind of organized revolt against the party, which was bound to be a failure, struck her as stupid. The clever thing was to break the rules and stay alive all the same. He wondered vaguely how many others like her there might be in the younger generation. People who had grown up in the world of the revolution, knowing nothing else, accepting the party as something unalterable, like the sky, not rebelling against its authority, but simply evading it, as a rabbit dodges a dawn. They did not discuss the possibility of a marriage. It was too remote to be worth thinking of. No imaginable committee would ever sanction such a marriage, even if Catherine, Winston's wife, could somehow have been got rid of. It was hopeless even as a daydream. What was she like? You did you admit? She was... Do you know the newspeak word good thinkful, meaning naturally orthodox, incapable of thinking a bad thought? Well, I didn't know the word, but I know the kind of person I am. He began telling her the story of his married life. But curiously enough, she appeared to know the essential parts of it already. She described to him, almost as though she had seen or felt it, the stiffening of Catherine's body as soon as he touched her. The way in which she still seemed to be pushing him from her with all her strength, even when her arms were clasped tightly around him. With Julia, he felt no difficulty in talking about such things. Catherine, in any case, had long ceased to be a painful memory and become merely distasteful. I could have stood it if it hadn't been for one thing, he said. He told her about the frigid little ceremony that Catherine had forced him to go through on the same night every week. She hated it, but nothing would make her stop doing it. She used to call it, but you'll never guess, our duty to the party. How did you know that? I've been at school, too. Sex talks once a month for the over 16s, and in the youth movement. They rub it into you for years. I dare say it works in a lot of cases. But of course, you can never tell people are such hypocrites. She began to alarm herself. With Julia, everything came back to her own sexuality. As soon as this was touched upon in any way, she was capable of great acuteness. Unlike Winston, she had grasped the inner meaning of the party's sexual purity. It was not merely that the sex instinct created a world of its own, which was outside the party's control, and which therefore had to be destroyed if possible. What was more important was that sexual privation induced hysteria, which was desirable because it could be transformed into warfare and leader worship. The way she put it was, when you make love, you're using up energy, and afterwards you feel happy and don't give a damn for anything. They can't bear you to feel it. They want you to be bursting with energy all the time. All this marching up and down and cheering and waving flags is simply sex gone sour. If you're happy inside yourself, why should you get excited about Big Brother and the 3-year plans and the 2 minutes hate and all the rest of their bloody rot? That was very true, he thought. There was a direct, intimate connection between chastity and political orthodoxy. For how could the fear, the hatred, and the lunatic credulity which the party needed in its members be kept at the right pitch, except by bottling down some powerful instinct and using it as a driving force? The sex impulse was dangerous to the party, and the party had turned it to account. They had played a similar trick with the instinct of parenthood. The family could not actually be abolished, and indeed people were encouraged to be fond of their children in almost the old-fashioned way. The children, on the other hand, were systematically turned against them and taught to spy on them and report their deviations. The family had become, in effect, an extension of the thought. It was a device by means of which everyone could be surrounded night and day by informers who knew him intimately. Abruptly, his mind went back to Catherine. Catherine would unquestionably have denounced him to the thought police if she had not happened to be too stupid to detect the unorthodoxy of his opinions. But what really recalled her to him at this moment was the stifling heat of the afternoon, which had brought the sweat out on his forehead. He began telling Julia of something that had happened, or rather had failed to happen, on another sweltering summer afternoon 11 years ago. It was 3 or 4 months after they were married. They had lost their way on a community hike somewhere in Kent. They had only lagged behind the others for a couple of minutes, but they took the wrong turn and presently found themselves pulled up short by the edge of an old chalkboard. It was a sheer drop of 10 or 20 meters with boulders at the bottom. There was nobody of whom they could answer the way. As soon as she realized that they were lost, Catherine became very uneasy. To be away from the noisy mob of hikers, even for a moment, gave her a feeling of wrongdoing. She wanted to hurry back by the way they had come and start searching in the other direction. But at this moment, Winston noticed some tufts of loosestrife growing in the cracks of the cliff beneath them. One tuft was of 2 colors, magenta and brick red, apparently growing on the same root. He had never seen anything of the kind before, and he called to Catherine to come and look at it. "Look, Catherine, look at those flowers. That clump down near the bottom. Do you see they're 2 different colors?" She had already turned to go, but she did rather frankly come back for a moment. She even leaned out over the cliff to see where he was pointing. He was standing a little behind her, and he put his hand on her waist to steady her. At this moment, it suddenly occurred to him how completely alone they were. There was not a human creature anywhere, not a leaf stirring, not even a bird awake. In a place like this, the danger that there would be a hidden microphone was very small. And even if there was a microphone, it would only pick up sound. It was the hottest, sleepiest hour of the afternoon. The sun blazed down upon him, the sweat tickled his face, and the thought struck him. Why didn't you give her a good shot? Said Julia. I would have. Yes, dear, you would have. I would have if I'd been the same person then as I am now. Or perhaps I'm not certain. Are you sorry you didn't? Yes, on the whole, I'm sorry I didn't. They were sitting side by side on the dusty floor. He pulled her closer against him. Her head rested on his shoulder, the pleasant smell of her hair conquering her pigeon bone. She was very young. She still expected something from him. She did not understand that to push an inconvenient person over a cliff solves nothing. Actually, it would have made no difference, he said. Then why are you sorry you didn't do it? Only because I prefer a positive to a negative. In this game that we're playing, we can't win. Some kinds of failure are better than other kinds, that's all. He felt her shoulders give a wriggle of dissent. She always contradicted him when he said anything of this kind. She would not accept it as a law of nature that the individual is always defeated. In a way, she realized that she herself was doomed, that sooner or later the thought police would catch her and kill her. But with another part of her mind, she believed that it was somehow possible to construct a secret world in which you could live as you chose. All you needed was luck and cunning and boldness. She did not understand that there was no such thing as happiness, that the only victory lay in the far future, long after you were dead, that from the moment of declaring war on the party, it was better to think of yourself as the corpse. We are the dead, he said. You're not dead yet, said Julia, presently. Not physically. 6 months, a year, 5 years, conceivably, I am afraid of it. You are young, so presumably you are more afraid of it than I am. Obviously, we shall put it off as long as we can, but it makes very little difference. So long as human beings stay human, death and life are the same thing. Oh, rubbish! Which would you sooner sleep with, me or a skeleton? Don't you enjoy being alive? Don't you like feeling? This is me, this is my hand, this is my leg. I'm real, I'm solid, I'm alive. Don't you like this? She twisted herself around and pressed her bosom against him. He could feel her breasts, ripe yet firm, through her overalls. Her body seemed to be pouring some of its youth and vigor into his. Yes, I like it, he said. Then stop talking, I'm done. And now, listen. We've got to fix up about the next time we meet. We may as well go back to the place in the wood. We've given it a good long rest. But you must get there by a different way this time. I've got it all planned out. You take the train, but look, I'll draw it out for you. And in her practical way, she scraped together a small square of dust. and with a twig from a pigeon's nest began drawing a map on the floor. Chapter 4. Winston looked round the shabby little room above Mr. Charrington's shop. Beside the window, the enormous bed was made up, with ragged blankets and a coverless bolster. The old-fashioned clock with the 12-hour face was ticking away on the mantelpiece. In the corner, on the gate-leg table, the glass paper-weight which he had bought on his last visit gleamed softly out of the half-darkness. In the fender was a battered tin oil stove, a saucepan, and 2 cups provided by Mr. Charrington. Winston lit the burner and set a pan of water on the mantel. He had brought an envelope full of Victory coffee and some sacrament items. The clock's hand said 7:20. It was 19:20, and she was coming at 19:30. Folly, folly, his heart kept saying. Conscious, gratuitous, suicidal folly. Of all the crimes that a party member could commit, this one was the least possible to conceal. Actually, the idea had first floated into his head in the form of a vision of the glass paperweight mirrored by the surface of the gate-leg table. As he had foreseen, Mr. Charrington had made no difficulty about letting the room. He was obviously glad of the few dollars Ada would give him. Nor did he seem shocked or become offensively knowing when it was made clear that Winston wanted the room for the purpose of a love affair. Instead, he looked into the middle distance and spoke in generalities with so delicate an air as to give the impression that he had become partly invisible. Privacy, he said, was a very valuable thing. Everyone wanted a place where they could be alone. And when they had such a place, it was only common courtesy and anyone else who knew of it to keep his knowledge to himself. He even, seeming almost to fade out of existence as he did so, added that there were 2 entries to the house, one of them through the backyard, which gave on an alley. Under the window, somebody was singing. Winston peeped out, secure in the protection of the muslin coat. The June sun was still high in the sky, and in the sun-filled court below, a monstrous woman, solid as a Norman pillar, with brawny red forearms and a sacking apron strapped about her middle, and stumping to and fro between a washtub and a clothesline, pegging out a series of square white ones which Winston recognized as babies' diapers. Whenever her mouth was not corked with clothes pegs, she was singing in a powerful contralto. It was only an hopeless fancy, it passed like an April dawn. But a look and a word and the dreams they stirred, they have stolen my heart. The tune had been haunting London for weeks past. It was one of countless similar songs published for the benefit of reporters by a subsection of the museum. The words of these songs were composed without any human intervention whatever on an instrument known as a versificator. But the woman sang so tunefully as to turn the dreadful rubbish into an almost pleasant sound. He could hear the woman singing, and the scrape of her shoes on the flagstones, and the crying of the children in the street, and somewhere in the far distance a faint roar of traffic, and yet the room seemed curiously silent, thanks to the absence of a telescope. Folly, 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 he thought. It was inconceivable that they could frequent this place for more than a few weeks without being caught. But the temptation of having a hiding place that was truly their own, indoors and near at hand, had been too much for both of them. For some time after their visit to the church belfry, it had been impossible to arrange meetings. Working hours had been drastically increased in anticipation of Hate Week. It was more than a month distant, but the enormous, complex preparations that it entailed were throwing extra work into everyone. Finally, both of them managed to secure a free afternoon on the same day. They had agreed to go back to the clearing in the wood. On the evening beforehand, they met briefly in the street. As usual, Winston hardly looked at Julia as they drifted toward one another in the crowd. But from the short glance he gave her, it seemed to him that she was paler than usual. "It's all off," she murmured as soon as she judged it safe to speak. "Tomorrow." "What?" "Tomorrow afternoon. I can't come." "Why not?" "Oh, the usual reason. It started early this time." For a moment he was violently angry. During the month that he had known her, the nature of his desire for
is set.
Petri Wine brings you Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce in the new adventures of Sherlock Holmes. The Petri family, a family that took time to bring you good wine, invite you to listen to Dr. Watson tell us another exciting adventure he shared with his good friend, that master detective, Sherlock Holmes. And I'd like to tell you about my favorite time of day. It's just before dinner. You know, when the family's all sitting around in the living room and wonderful things are cooking in the kitchen? That's for me. And boy, that's the time for a glass of sherry. Because Petri California sherry really makes waiting for dinner a pleasure. A Petri sherry is the perfect before dinner wine. Just look at its beautiful amber color. And then taste that wonderful Petri sherry. What a flavor. Petri sherry has a rich, nutty flavor that's right from the heart of sun-ripened grapes. And if you like your sherry dry, you know, not sweet, you want to get Petri Pale Dry Sherry. Or better yet, taste them both. Don't buy one, buy two. Those letters P-E-T-R-I on the label are the personal assurance of the Petri family that Petri sherry is truly good wine. And now it's time to keep the weekly appointment with our good friend, Dr. Watson. How are you this evening, Doctor?
I never felt better, thank you, Mr. Bartell. Draw up your usual chair and make yourself comfortable.
Thanks.
That's it.
I see you've had the old tin dispatch box out again. I suppose you've been going through your notes on tonight's new Sherlock Holmes adventure?
Yes, Bartell, I think you'll find it as pretty a little problem as we've ever encountered. The story began in 1887. A very busy year for us, my boy. It was the same year that Holmes solved the case of the Amateur Medical Society, who held their meetings in a luxuriously furnished vault below a furniture warehouse.
I remember that story, Doctor. And wasn't 87 the year you both escaped from death in the Paradol chamber?
It was indeed. You've got a very good memory, Mr. Bartell. The story I'm going to tell you tonight topped off this unusually exciting year. It was late in October, and equinoctial gales had set in with exceptional violence. All day the wind had howled and the rain had beaten against the windows of our Baker Street lodgings. Finally, it was midnight, as far as I remember. The storm grew higher and louder, and the wind in the chimney sobbed like a child. Suddenly, much to our surprise, the doorbell jangled, and a few moments later, our midnight visitor stood before us. He was a man of about 45. And as he looked about him anxiously in the glare of the lamp, I could see that his face was pale and that his eyes heavy, like those of a man who was weighed down with some great anxiety. And yet when he spoke, his tone was businesslike.
After you, advice, Mr. Holmes. That's easily obtained. And help. That is not always so easy. Help the gentleman off this carefully, Watson.
Here you are, sir. Let me hang it up for you.
Thank you, sir. I heard of you, Mr. Holmes, from Major Prendergast.
Oh, yes.
He said that you could solve anything.
I'm afraid he said too much.
But you've never been beaten.
I've been beaten 4 times, sir. 3 times by men and once by a woman. But suppose you sit down and introduce yourself. My friend name is Watson, Dr. Watson.
How do you do, sir?
How do you do, Doctor? My name is Lovelace, Edmund Lovelace.
And what brings you to me this hour of the night, Mr. Lovelace?
I'm in terrible trouble, Mr. Holmes. You don't know anything about me, but if you'll accept my case, you can save 4 lives.
I wouldn't say that I know nothing about you, sir, though it's true that I know little beyond the somewhat obvious fact that, well, you're single, keep a dog, but not a manservant, and that you are much preoccupied with your business, which I take to be some form of insurance.
Come.
Now, what is this?
Well, I'll wager that my friend's right, though, isn't he, Mr. Lovelace?
Perfectly. I'll be hanged if I can see how he knows.
It's just a practical application of logic, sir. The briefcase that you carry might at first indicate a barrister or some other professional man, but your brusque, business-like manner counteracts that suggestion. An insurance broker who must visit clients at odd hours is the likeliest man to combine that manner with a briefcase at midnight.
But the wife and the manservant, and the fact that I'm preoccupied with my business.
Your culprits don't match, sir. Each is from a different plan. That would suggest preoccupation, and it's a mistake that neither a wife nor a servant would have allowed to pass.
How about the dog?
Oh, surely that's optional. I shall let you ponder on that matter while Mr. Lovelace tells us his plot.
Mr. Holmes, are you as interested in preventing a murder as in solving one?
Naturally I am, Mr. Lovelace. Even more so. But Please tell me your story.
I lived with 4 cousins of mine in an old house in Camberwell. My grandfather left the house and a sizable fortune to the 5 of us on condition that we lived together and maintained the family unity. It probably won't surprise you to know that we've grown to get pretty much on each other's nerves.
Well, what happens if one of you dies, Mr. Lovelace?
His share divided among the others, don't you?
The one between you, sir, that not that a murder may take place, but that it has not happened long ago. Who's responsible for the administration of the estate?
My cousin Gerald. He's much older than the rest of us, and he's a thoroughly unpleasant, cantankerous man. He gets an extra share in the estate as administrator, and in consequence he doesn't work. We feel, of course, that he lives off us, and we're continually quarreling with him about it.
Sounds like a jolly household, I must say.
There's going to be trouble, Mr. Holmes, I know it. Gerald hates us, and he's jealous of our share in the estate.
You spoke of preventing murder just now. Yet I can see that you've selected your cousin Gerald as the potential murderer. Am I right?
Yes, you are. But don't think it's personal prejudice that makes me suspect him. I have good reason for doing so.
What reason?
This evening, just before dinner, I helped Gerald off with his top coat and went to hang it up for him. As I did so, I heard a strange clink in one of his pockets. I slipped my hand inside it and found a hypodermic syringe and a small pile of liquid. I opened the pile and smelled it. Gentlemen, it reeked of bitter almond.
Cyanide, eh?
What did you do?
I thought of destroying it, but I realized that would put him on his guard, so I replaced it in his pocket. Of course, I warned the others, and we decided that I'd come to you. I have a most important client tonight, or I'd have been here earlier.
Yes, it seems odd that you didn't come directly to Mr. Holmes as soon as you'd made the discovery, Mr. Lovelace. After all, if a potential murderer is walking about with a pocket full of cyanide, I should have thought that itself was more important than business.
Well, yes, I suppose it might seem so to you, Doctor.
That's the most interesting stick you carry, sir. May I examine it?
Of course. Yeah.
Now I see how you deduced that Mr. Lovelace had a dog, Holmes. The marks of the dog's teeth on the skin.
Yes, my dear Watson, but these marks under scrutiny give us even more specific information. He's a large dog. You've had him for some years, Mr. Lovelace, and he's now old and feeble.
Well, you're perfectly right, but I'll be hanged if I can see how you can tell that from looking at a walking stick.
This stick is covered with teeth marks, therefore it has been carried many times by the dog. Now it's a heavy stick, so only a large dog could have carried it. And the teeth marks also indicate a large jaw. The older marks are deep sunk. Look here. The fresh ones, where the wood is not yet darkened, are shallow. Yes, it's obvious that the jaws are losing their strength.
That's very clever of you, Mr. Holmes, but I don't see what it has to do with the case in hand.
Neither do I, Holmes. I must confess.
No, surely it tells us that your story, Mr. Lovelace, may bear a less terrifying implication than you think. On the other hand, its implication may be even more terrifying. Though it's late at night, I feel that any further delay in this matter would be extremely dangerous. I suggest that you get a cab and come to your house in Camberwell at once.
Randolph, I'm glad you're still up. I was able to persuade Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, to come back. Gentlemen, this is my cousin, Alice Hardy.
How do you do?
How do you do, Miss Hunt?
How do you do?
And my cousin, Randolph Lovelace.
How do you do? How do you do, sir?
I've told him about the whole business, Randolph, so we can all speak perfectly freely.
Let's begin by sitting down, shall we? Randolph and I have just finished a little cold supper. We've been to the theatre tonight.
Well, Mr. Holmes, I suppose Edmund told you about finding the hypodermic syringe and the cyanide in Gerald's coat pocket.
Yes, indeed. May I ask where your cousin Gerald Lovelace is now?
We left the house at 7, but I imagine Gerald went upstairs at 8 as usual. Didn't he, Edmund?
On the stroke of 8, Alice. He's very fixed in his habits, Mr. Holmes. He goes up to his room every night at 8. There he reads or works on his accounts and eventually goes to bed any time between 10 and 1. Well, he might stay up.
I should like to speak to him a little later. In the meanwhile, may I ask you two young people to tell me quite honestly your feelings about your cousin Gerald?
And you might as well be frank. I've kept nothing back.
All right. Randolph and I hate him. First of all, we're sure he's jealous of our shares in the estate, and then we...
Alice and I want to get married, Mr. Holmes. Gerald won't hear of it.
But you're cousins, aren't you?
Only second cousins, Dr. Watson. Gerald is dreadfully conventional. He's threatened us that if we do get married, he'll go to court and try to have our shares in the estate annulled.
And from the way the will is worded, I wouldn't be surprised he could do it. So you can see why we have no great love for him. Why we're afraid of him.
He sounds an extremely unpleasant person. Really?
You mentioned there were 5 cousins in the house. 3 of you are here. Mr. Gerald Lovelace is upstairs. Who and where is the 5th cousin?
The 5th cousin is my brother, Gerald. is something of a tragedy, I'm afraid. You see, Gilly's 20, but he never developed mentally beyond the age of 8. He had a bad fall in the hunting field when he was a kid. He's been like this ever since.
I'm sorry to hear that, sir.
But he's the dearest, most gentle boy you've ever met.
And, incidentally, the one person in this house who doesn't hate Gerald.
Your fellow doesn't understand the conditions of the world, I suppose.
No. But if he did, I don't think it'd make any difference. I swear that Gilly loves every living thing, especially Gladstone. Gladstone is the name of his dog.
His dog? Yes. The dog may be the key to this whole matter.
Dog? Did you say that, Helen?
When a man brings a quick and painless poison home to a household containing an old enfeebled dog, it's more than possible that he's obtained that poison quite legitimately to give the dog a merciful death.
To kill Gladstone? Oh, no!
After all, he is old and almost blind.
But, Mr. Holmes, if you think Gerald brought home the poison to put Gladstone out of the way, well, I admit it sounds perfectly logical. What made you decide to come here tonight?
Because I dare not even guess what you may have done by intruding the thought of murder in this situation. Where is your brother Gilly?
In his room upstairs, asleep.
I wonder if we might go up to him. I should like to talk to him, if you don't mind. And after that, I want a few words with your cousin, Gerald Lovelace.
He's asleep, Mr. Holmes.
He's a dog in his arms.
I'm afraid we'll have to waken him.
Gilly? Gilly? It's all right, Gladstone. We're not going to hurt him. Gilly?
Who is it? Oh, hello, Alice. Who are these men? They've come to take Gladstone away.
No, Gilly, we haven't.
Of course not, Gilly. We've just come to admire him. Your brother's been telling us what a fine dog he is.
It's different. Isn't he beautiful? I just had such a wonderful dream about him. Oh, such a wonderful dream.
What was it, Gilly?
Well, he was all young again. Just a puppy. He was chasing a rabbit across a cliff top. And I was running with him. Oh, Gladstone looked so beautiful. Didn't you, old boy? Of course you did. And you know, the rabbit went down a hole, and Gladstone went down after him. And I went down after Gladstone. And we made tea with the rabbits. But funny, they all had little green hats on. Hats with feathers. I wanted Gladstone to try one on, but he wouldn't. So sleepy. Come on, Gladstone. Let's go back to the tea party.
Okay. This world may be a great deal more pleasant than ours, Watson.
That's what I'd like to think, Mr. Holmes.
Now I'd like to have a few words with your cousin Gerald.
His room's at the end of this corridor.
I'm afraid Gilly wasn't much help to you, Mr. Holmes.
On the contrary, young lady, he told me exactly what I wanted to know.
Here we are. This is Gerald's room.
There's no light under the door. He must have gone to sleep.
I'm afraid he was waking him too.
He's a sleeper.
But he isn't. He's a remarkably light one.
Come on, let's go in. Strike a match, will you, old fellow?
Sure.
Reading number 1. The symptoms. Waiting to pass through transition, I make the effort to release myself from the mind, the habits, and the identity of the human primate. I remember myself as a voyager, separating myself from identification with the human primate, within which I have been voyaging throughout its lifetime. As a voyager,
The impartial observation of the limits of life in a fish tank can provide us with an important clue as to the real nature of our planetary situation and a basis for asking ourselves what the meaning and purpose of life can be. So, in this particular chapter, the author A.J. Gold is saying to us very specifically, this is an impartial observation. We use the term impartial observation quite often. It's a critical tool to learn the concept impartial observation. Okay, but what he's saying here is impartial observation of limits. He's saying of life in a fish tank. He's not saying me as an individual, us as a group over there. Right now, our job is observation of life in a fish tank and see if it gives us
let's lay down this beginning to the task and an end to the task. Let's say you're going to bring a prim to market, which is one of the things I hope to do today. You're going to bring a prim to market, a single prim to market. And if that allows us something to do, let me know, because I can change that. Or we can do it later. But the idea is, when you bring a prim to market, there's a series of steps that you must take. Not the least of which is you have to have a shop. If you don't already have a shop, that has to be included in the bringing the prim to market, so forth, so on and so on. It can be very elaborate, it can be very simple. You already have a shop, you already know how to put a prim together, you already know how to upload to the shop. It's going to take you about 5 minutes. You have no idea what the hell I'm talking about, it's going to take you about a week. Okay? So that's the range of preparation relative to effect. But anyway, what happens is that you create the prim, and then you go from there. You create it, then you name it, then you give it characteristics, then you do this, that, the other thing, then you give it a price, and so and so. Then you upload it into the marketplace, to your merchant's outbox, your marketplace. You put it on the market, then you write a little blurb about it. You make a nice title. You get a photograph, put the photograph there, and so on and so on and so on. All these things that go to make up this one little thing. By the way, I have almost 100 of those ads. Some of them have 8 and 10 photographs on them. It takes a long time to do these things. I'm hoping you appreciate the ads that I put up, because I put a lot of gems in these. Lots and lots of very practical work on self-gems and those things. Every ad carries some work list. Every single one of those listings. 78, I think it's 80, some of these things. I craft those up just the same way as I was doing in book. So, so when you start with the prim, and you end with the, okay, I've got it listed, that is called a work cycle. Improperly so, I think. It should not be called a work cycle, because it doesn't begin again unless you left something out, you failed to do something, you uploaded the wrong thing, the thing was, when you tested it, it wasn't right. There's somebody calls you and writes you and says, no, you didn't put the alpha layer in, or whatever it might be. Something happens that screwed it up. Okay? Now you have a different situation. It's no longer a simple cycle of start here and there. Now it's correct, find, figure out, how do you do it, and so on. There may be other skills needed to do things like, for instance, upload a new item rather than rewrite the whole thing. Upload a new item and put it in place of the old item and make sure that it works by downloading it, doing a test download, seeing if it works, verifying it, having somebody purchase and having somebody download up and then lay it out and deploy it and so forth. By the way, resin is what they really mean deployment when they say resin, incidentally. And I think deployment is a better term, but people like resin. But you are deploying, especially when you're using a so-called res box or resin. You're actually deploying items out of the box, one at a time, to different locations. You're turning them and deploying them, rotating and deploying. So, is that how you do it? Or is it the res box? Does it do that? You know deploy? No.
I don't use the word deploy very much.
Well, I do.
It's just,
you find it incorrect, or?
No, not incorrect. I just use, I'm more trained to use the word res, and that comes from Twitter. Right. Because we're constantly resing.
Right. That's exactly where I get it from as military. I prefer the military terminology in this particular case because deploy is a tactical decision and a tactical carryout. So when you have a tactical carryout like that, I consider it tactical because what you're doing is you're attacking the space by putting things in it. And so deployment, I think, is, for me, is a very apt term, just in terms of training people. I don't mean in terms of course you're going to use the word res, but just in your mindset somewhere, back of your mind, just say, I'm deploying these items out onto the field. See? Think that way a little bit, just a little bit. Don't have to replace the verbiage. Just in the back of your mind, see that that's what you're doing, is you're tactically placing things out in a battlefield. The battlefield being, in the case of the ashram, a battlefield for consciousness, a battlefield for the conscious. It's a battlefield for the waking state, if you So one of the things that will happen as you work in the ashram is you will start, the waking state will start sticking to you more and more, because it's going to come off from your avatar back. It's going to backwash. It's kind of like what happens when you pass a 7-Up bottle around this campfire. You know, get a little backwash. So you don't if you do the proper thing, which is to wipe the bottle neck like this with your hand. That's just been on the that you just used. Never mind.
But you can stop that line of conversation anytime you want.
What makes you think I can? No, it's true. When you fail, at the end of your life, if you have not successfully accomplished everything you set out to do, the redo button is right there, and that automatically goes off. It recognizes that you have failed to make the correct count, whatever that count is, 99 or whatever it might be, whatever you set it at. These are the things I'm to accomplish, and if you don't, you simply repeat the cycle. That's cycle. But if you have successfully completed all of your mission on Earth, then you pass forward, and you're going to be ending up at what the ashram is connected to. The ashram on the other end is as removed. In other words, the ashram looks as much like that as it does like this, which is kind of, okay, sort of like that. But so when you get through the ashram to the other side of it, don't forget the ashram's in the middle. The ashram's not the end point. The ashram's between where you are and where you go. It's halfway-ish. Not quite halfway. It's more toward our side, actually. It goes through 2 transformations to get here. There's both of those transformations turn it first upside down, then right side up, in each case, so that both of the things relatively right themselves, but the inside, the lensatic world, is upside down. So it has to be corrected right side and up when you look at it. In any case, if you have not completed, how do you know whether you have or haven't completed your mission? That question was very, very well asked. It was asked about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, by someone who is back with us now, working with us now, has been gone for a number of years, and is, through no fault of his own, it was a long mission that he was on. Anyway, he's back, and he wanted to know this kind of, how to resolve this issue. Have I completed my mission on Earth for this lifetime? Simple enough question. It presupposes that you are aware that you have such a mission. And then, are you interested in completing it? Because maybe you're not at this time. Maybe you think, a few thousand lifetimes, no big deal, throw it away. Nice vacation. And you can, you're allowed to do that. If you want to piss it away, you're allowed to. It's called free will. And the real free will that you're exercising is whether you are going to repeat and repeat and repeat a lifetime, or you're going to go on to the next lifetime and do the job there. And the only way to get that privilege is to have completed the previous mission, i.e. the present mission. Do you understand that? Does it make sense to you? You can't go on to the next level until you complete this level. Duh? In Diablo, you have these blocks there that stop you from going on and until you complete each level. And then when you complete that level, guess what? There's another level to complete, and guess what? It won't let you go there until you completed the one you're in. And that's true. Every turtle has that. Every turtle? Yes. Turtles all the way down. That's right. Okay, 5-minute break, please.
It's so weird to get something done.
So I do want to alert them that there is a test to see whether what you completed is what you haven't completed. So we won't get that next time. That's the next hour we should talk about. You must understand that when you go forward into the next life, you go forward to the next level. And this way, I explained it, it's very similar to levels in a game, a video game. It is actually levels in a video game in a very real sense. You can't go to the next level unless you've completed this level. So at the end of your life, you're going to have an assessment, and at that assessment, it's going to measure the differential between your proposed purpose, your mission, your reason for entering into an earth incarnation, earthian incarnation. So a human, you're an earthian incarnation, no less. So you have to have a good reason to do that, because it's not comfortable. It's not something you would normally do unless you had a mission or a reason to be here. So bots don't have to have a reason to be here. Bots are here. But you normally wouldn't walk into this kind of meat grinder unless you had a reason to be here. That reason to be here is not one of the organic reasons like sex, drugs, money, diet, beauty, power, fashions, any of the 5 major food groups on the left-hand path. Look, none of that stuff actually attracts you from out there. Don't forget, from out there, no time passes. I don't know if you know that, if you remember that or not. No time passes. There's no time outside of space. Space is actually, you could call it the father of time, or the mother of time. Because it's a matrix within which time exists, but outside of which it doesn't exist at all. So passage in time is absolutely meaningless, because everything happens all at once. And that's normal for that kind of consciousness, to have everything happen all at once. It's all happening all at once. This is it. This is what happened. And I said it better before. I think I'll try to get back there again a little bit with it. At the end of your life, there is a why. You're going to cycle back through. That's what we're talking about, cycles. You end up cycling back through your life if you have not completed your mission for this life on this earth at this time that you're passing. In other words, you have a mission, a particular purpose, a particular idea, but you have a particular thing in mind. You must do. Generally, it's several things, not just one. So you have a checklist, and you can call this, if you want, the end-of-life checklist, or the life mission checklist, because that's how you could maybe designate it. And this is what I developed, actually, for this fellow who asked for it. He actually had the common sense to ask for this thing, and he knew there was such a thing, and by golly, there is. So the life mission checklist. Now, in order to develop a checklist, you have to know what the life mission is. Because otherwise, you have no way of knowing. It's like a laundry list. And this is where Gracie Allen excels, because she makes her laundry list after the laundry comes back, in which case she cannot possibly find any losses in her laundry. She used to get a lot of things were lost when she made the list out before it went to the laundry. See? So now she loses nothing off her list. It's a much more comfortable place to be. But it's nowhere near reality. So you have to have a laundry list, basically. Well, let's call it that. You have to have a laundry list of what it is you're going to do on Earth. One of those laundry list things is going to be you're going to clean up some karma, because inevitably, throughout your career, you have done some horrendous things. I'm serious. And we need to actually explore some of those things in some of your past life investigations. I like to call them investigations because you can think of it like the Biotime Institute, for those of you who know what that is, where you investigate your past, your own past, by looking at various lifetimes that you've lived, and looking at various incidents and events and occurrences and things you've done in the past, in the very, very distant past, in the not so distant past, and sideways from here, and future from here as well. And that's all past. You understand, once you get outside the universe, there is no time. So if you want to enter into a time-space point, you have to create a space relationship before the time factors or functions start kicking into place and start getting a time stream and therefore time flow, and eventually time passes. It takes microseconds to set it up. It takes subjectively years to actually get through it, to experience it and go through it. So, what is this mysterious checklist that I have developed for you? Well, this is kind of hard to explain. I better go back a little bit. You must realize before this is of any value to you that there is such a checklist. You have to understand that there is a recipe for your life. This is a certain list, a laundry list that you've prepared. These are the things you're intending to accomplish. This particular pass through. Those are bets in a way, if you want to call it that. You're betting that you can do this. Usually it's 10 items on the list. Usually it's 10. And in this particular sector, here's the thing that you need to know, is it's not that personalized, because in this sector, you have a set of 10 known objectives, they're called, objectives. Those 10 objectives in this space sector are always going to be the same in an Earth environment. How many Earth environments are there in this sector? Actually only one, but it's separated by servers. So, and it's walled. It's firewalled. So you have no normal connection with any other parallel universe. The firewall, we call the membrane, is there. It's in place. If you know how to walk through it, well and good. That's what you're learning in the Builder's course, among other things. There's people who walk through firewalls. Actually walk through them, walk through walls. You'll be able to do that. You'll be able to walk through walls, levitate, the whole deal. Why? So you can move for no other reason. To show off? No! Just to move around. So you're also going to learn to project from your root prep, so you'll be able to manifest yourself virtually anywhere. Actually, I should say. That will also help you to move around and help you to make your moves and help you to do the things accomplish the goals that you've set for yourself, which is to say you've agreed to the set goals. So, having said all that, you have somewhere in the past, you agreed to one or more of the set goals of this particular space-time discontinuum. Checking each one to see if there is completion or not completion, or when that completion would be, is relatively easy. And how it's accomplished, we'll discuss as we get into the building class more as part of the Master Builders course, that you will do this. At some point in the MBC, you're going to be presented with, some would say overwhelmed with, the requirement, or request, some would say, some would say request, not many, we're going to say requirement, to come up with a solid assessment of your mission, of how much of your set goals have you actually accomplished. If the answer is 3 out of 10, and you're in your 60s or 70s, we need to get you working really, really fast. If it's 9 out of 10 that you've accomplished, and there's one that you haven't even thought of doing, or haven't even entered into or onto, and you're in your 60s or 70s, we need to talk real fast, because you need to develop skills that you probably don't have at this point, and probably don't even dream of need. If you're in your 20s or 30s, you can kick back, relax, take it easy. 50 years from now, start to panic.
Yes.
Or you can get your work done now, have it out of the way, not worry about it, and then don't sweat out the rest of it. And from that point on, you're actually in a position to, it's just not just wanting to help others, it's not just wanting to help, it's not just wanting to do things for the benefit of all beings ever, it's being able to. You see what I mean? There's a skill level involved with that. It's not just, gee, I think I'd like to, you know. So, you can start out, by the way, entering into the field of non-entropy, the non-entropic field, through several things. One is contact. Number 1 is contact. Number 2 is participation. And number 3 is interaction. Interaction is where, for instance, the kid that finally said, where does a guy get something to eat around here? That's interaction. But it should have happened a lot earlier. When in doubt, when in trouble, ask for help. Don't just assume that nobody's there to help and that nobody's interested in helping you. That's not true. When in doubt, when in trouble, ask for help. So number 1 rule of the ABD, ask for help.
It goes on and on and on like that.
With very good reason, because I know thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people, tens of thousands, who aren't able to ask for help. I've met them, and they tell me this, that they're not able to ask for help. For a number of reasons, one of which, of course, is most obvious, is they don't think it'll help. They don't think it'll be of any benefit. Or anything will come of it, anything positive will come of it. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And the first obstacle you have to overcome, because, so what if it doesn't? Give him some chicken soup. Sir, this man is dead. Chicken soup will not help him. It wouldn't hurt. So it doesn't hurt to have. These are money-making techniques. Things you can actually earn cash. Cash money. You can keep that cash money. I don't want your money. I want you to learn these things. So I would be very happy if you kept whatever you made from the sale of these things. If you want to donate, that's a different story. You're welcome to do that, and I appreciate that. But that's not the issue. The point is that you get some flow, some traffic, some interaction. That's the third key is interaction. You have contact, you got participation, which is where you take part in something, you actually do something. But interaction is where you actually communicate and you actually do indicate that you have done something, and you ask, did you do this? Yes, you did. Okay, back and forth. So you confirm, you confirm that things happen, that things occur, and so forth. So one of those things, for instance, is this. This morning I made, I'm very, very pleased with myself about this because I wanted to prove this point to people. I took an item from zero, from scratch. I made a 5-piece offering of it in 5 different sizes with alpha layer, the whole schmear, piece of fashion work. This is for EJ Guru, and it's at my new shop, which is somewhere on the Street of Dreams, and it's brick outside, stucco inside. This thing, and it was very, very fun because it was about a 5-minute project. I'm not kidding. Where I did all the permissions, I did all of the layers and the textures and the this and the that, and the other, and the packaging, and I did the pricing, and then I did the photography. You saw me do the photography, right? Yeah. So I did the photography out by the cars, the car lot. It's very, very cool out there to do photography with something that you got on, because it's got all these beautiful cars out there. You can pose with the car and just get a great spin off that. So, anyone can do that kind of thing. So, I did these shots. By the way, you can even create a layout for yourself. You can create a studio for yourself, a photo studio. Let's say you do fashions. Say you devote 50 prims to things like palm trees and a little some beach sand. Then you make another thing, zoop it, and make another thing, and so forth. You can use 200 prims, make $1 million, Linden-wise. $1 million Lindens. You know what I'm saying?
If you're making anything for the marketplace,
yeah,
200 prims is enough to work with, because you can't sell anything that requires more than 200 prims. So that's good news for folks in terms of their ability to turn around and pull somebody else up the ladder.
Or get pulled up by someone.
Or get pulled up and be exposed to some fresh vision.
One of the things I would like to do is to have you work toward the marketplace. Don't get on the marketplace right away unless you feel very confident to do it. But for instance, my segment is, I think, is ready to get into the marketplace. Don't you?
Today, no.
No, I mean,
he's on the path to the marketplace.
Yeah,
definitely on the path.
Just keep working at it, because you're really good, and you need to develop not just some skills, but also some knowledge of what it is that people want out there.
Well, yes and no. I think if you find within yourself a particular vision and you can refine that vision, there's a good chance that out of the 50 to 100,000 active participants, there will be a following for that vision that's somebody finds. My Satan, as an example, has a different vision, which I don't know technically what it's called. I just call it kitsch. I know that's not specific enough, but it's...
I call it futuristic kitsch.
Yeah, neo-kitsch, maybe. But it's...
Avant kitsch.
Yeah,
that's cute. Avant kitsch.
I want it.
Yes. I want, you want, everyone wants it.
Even though you learn through pain. I've always maintained this, that pain is a great teacher. You learn through pain. You learn through making mistakes. You learn through failure. Failure is a great teacher. It's not something to be afraid of. So you end up with something that doesn't work. So what? And you try again. Okay? Your point is,
It's another aspect of being as
So if you get to, when you get to the end of your life, you will eventually, when you get to the end of your life, and you have an assessment of that, you could have an assessment now if you thought it, and if you thought it was worthwhile, but you don't really think you're going to die at all, let alone soon. You don't even think of that. I'm not gonna die. Who can afford to die? Coffin's $8,000 for a funeral, $20,000. Give me a break. The headstone alone, even the laser cut headstone, you're talking $8 grand, $9 grand. Well, who can afford to die? So I know people who are planning to not just because they can't afford it. So you can do an assessment. You do a life assessment, and what it is actually a life mission assessment. Did you get the points that you were going to get? Did you do the things you were going to do? That you said you were going to do, you committed to do.
You said you wanted to learn something, so something like the circumstance is going to keep pointing it out to you, giving you an opportunity to see the arrows.
Right. This is called R&R, repetition and reinforcement. Repetition and reinforcement. Repetition and reinforcement. That's what it's about. And that's how you train. It's called entrainment. Repetition and reinforcement. You repeat it and you reinforce it. You reinforce it in a variety of ways. Everything from praise, acknowledging that somebody's done well, all the way through to actually giving a treat of some kind. And you do it like as if your body is a dog. You treat it the same way in a sense, with the respect that you would give a dog too. I hope you give dogs respect. With the respect that you would give a dog for performing that service for you.
And the other problem is that this is not a test to see if you are worthy of moving on to the great reward in the sky. It's not a test. It's you made a commitment to accomplishing a certain something, and this is the place, the opportunity to accomplish that. So if you fail to accomplish it, you'd say, wow, you get a do-over.
Yeah, well, if you show up in a clinic, which is basically what my shop is, it's a clinic shop. You show up at my shop, at my clinic, you are a 10 lister. In other words, you're going to have committed to all 10, which means that you're an advanced player to begin with. Whether you admit that or not, you're an advanced player. Or you were an advanced player when you walked into it. You may not now, you may not remember, you may not have any idea, but you had enough of a clue to find your way here. That's pretty good. Right there, it's the start. So, now it's a question of realizing that there are some undone portions of those things, or you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be here if you were certain that you had finished, you had completed all of your life goals, every single thing that you have set out to do. That list of 10, that infamous list of 10, every single button in there is lit. I'll bet you that hardly any of them are lit. And you need to light them up. You need to actually get them as complete. So where they're not complete, we need to send you on a particular quest that will complete that particular thing. Those quests can be manufactured, luckily, either in God or in the ashram. One way or the other, we can make that happen through orbs, in some cases, or in the ashram in other cases, where you can actually accomplish this. And sometimes, a couple of things that can't be, the things on a Boy Scout level, you're going to have to do in life. That's good. That's the way it is, in country. We used to call it when we were in the bad place. So yeah, that's where some work is. Some work is at the ashram, some work is in the orb, some work can be accomplished in dream work, some can be accomplished on the beacon and so forth. Each of those things adds to your ability to check that list off of accomplished. I did this, I did this, I did this. Sometimes it's just one thing left undone that can screw you up. Always, actually, because one thing left undone counts as nothing done. You leave one thing undone, it's a zero. You don't get 90%, you get nothing.
Well, if you're dialing a phone number, it doesn't work if you get, 9 out of the 10 digits.
Yeah.
I dialed 9. It's pretty damn close.
It's like the number stations. Every time you log in, your basically says to 0. You gotta get them all in one go.
Yeah, that's exactly right. What happened? Well, they're cumulative in the sense that you can, or additive in the sense that you can click them off. But when you're ready to pass, you want to have all 10 of those things lit. When you do, you move to the next level. You go to the next level. That's L315A is where you're done. Essentially, I don't know if they survived, but the Lensatic L315A is the midpoint, representing a midpoint between two very dissimilar realities. So you're viewing a reality which is very, very wildly dissimilar from this, and a wildly different set of physics, for instance, but it's got a common ground, which is what we call the ashram. That is the point between these two things. Like I said, I'll show this again because you'll get the idea of the thing from this, which is the fingers. And you hold your fingers up like this, like that, and you put them just ahead of you like this. What'll happen is if you stare straight ahead, past the fingers, you'll see that there's like a little sausage that forms in the air in between your fingers, you see? And you can move your fingers in and out to make that bigger and smaller, and make it round or make it long and so on. That is called the magic medium, regardless of what many people think the magic reading might be. This is the magic reading. And what it is it's a thing that doesn't exist. It does not exist. It's a trick of optical illusion. At the same time, weirdly enough, it also does exist. It is there. It does exist. And it exists in a quantum way because you see it there. It exists there. It exists in a quantum way. It's an observed phenomenon, even though the phenomenon is incorrect. Physically speaking, it's still an observed phenomenon. It therefore exists quantumly. I know that's ridiculous to science today. That's an absurdity. But it is actually true that what you see as existing, because you see it existing, then exists quantumly as that. So you take the snapshots, billions, trillions of snapshots, and you actually are doing that. I can prove it to you. You have any idea how amazing your library is of past shots, snapshots of yourself? Go and just reach back and just look at the most ridiculous thing, like something with an oak tree. You're around an oak tree. There's an oak tree behind you. Just a snapshot. When was it? How long ago was that? Now look at something that has white marble on it. Just a little kind of white marble somewhere. You got that? Good. How about something that has a bus, that you're on a bus? If you're getting on a bus, or just getting off a bus, or near a bus, or a bus was passing by. All right, so you have tons of images, and as a matter of fact, I can demonstrate this all day long to you. You have images from this lifetime, you have images from other lifetimes, you have images from lifetimes you haven't yet lived, because everything is from here is the past, everything from the present is all past. Present, future, all this is all, it's an absurdity. We're running out of time on this thing.
Come here. Come here. All the way. Good girl. Good girl. Good girl. Good. Oh! Ruby. Huh? Yeah, but it's in a good spot right now. So, paint on his tail. Pot it. think it's